You've been taught to fight life, to push harder, to fix everything. They told you peace comes when things finally go your way, when your job is perfect, your partner understands you, your past stops haunting you. But if that were true, why do you still feel tired? Why do your thoughts spin like a wheel that never stops turning? Why does your chest tighten at night, even when nothing's technically wrong? The truth is, you're not broken. You're just resisting what is. And the more you resist, the heavier life feels. But there's another way, a quieter, softer path that leads not to escape, but to freedom. And it begins with one ancient truth: let go. Tonight, you'll fall asleep not by silencing your thoughts, but by no longer fighting them. You'll hear Buddhist wisdom that has helped monks find stillness in storms, wisdom that teaches you don't need to control life. You just need to stop pushing against it. This isn't just another sleep audio. This is a shift, a soft uncoiling of the tension you didn't know you were carrying. And as the words sink in, your breath will slow, your body will loosen, and something deep within you will whisper, I don't have to struggle anymore. Are you ready to stop resisting and finally rest? Let's begin. You've tried effort. You've tried forcing, fixing, chasing. You've done everything right. But it still feels like something is missing. Like no matter how fast you run, peace stays one step ahead. And in those quiet moments when there's nothing left to tweak or improve, you feel it. That empty hum beneath all the doing. That silent whisper that says, what if the very thing you're trying to reach can only be found by not reaching? There is a strange, quiet power in letting go. Not giving up, not quitting, but truly, deeply releasing the tight grip you've had on how things should go. It feels unnatural at first. After all, we've been told our whole lives that effort equals value, that results come only through constant striving, that ease is laziness. But some of the wisest traditions in the world say otherwise, especially Buddhism, and even more so, the teachings of Zen and Dzogchen. They say the more you chase, the more you push away what you seek. Because when you strive, you're telling life that what's here is not enough, that you are not enough, that now is not the right time, that some future version of you, somewhere down the line, is more worthy of peace, joy, and wholeness. And as long as you believe that, you'll never arrive. In Zen, there's a phrase, when the archer shoots for nothing, he has all his skill. When he shoots for a prize, he becomes nervous. In other words, when there is no trying, the action flows freely. But the moment you need an outcome, tension begins, thought interferes, fear shows up, and the thing you wanted so badly slips through your fingers. The paradox is clear. You achieve more when you let go of the need to achieve. This isn't just spiritual poetry, it's neurological. Your brain enters a different mode when you're relaxed and open. Creativity, clarity, intuition, they all live in that space. But when your nervous system is tense from constant effort, everything tightens. Your vision narrows, your heart races, your body braces for a fight that never ends. And, ironically, this state blocks the very results you're working toward. So what does letting go really mean? It doesn't mean doing nothing. It means dropping the inner pressure, the endless commentary that says you're falling behind, the background voice comparing you to everyone else, the idea that unless something changes right now, you can't feel okay. In Dzogchen, the teachings go even deeper. They say your natural state, your true awareness is already perfect, already complete, not in some future life, but right now. The only reason you don't see it is because you're looking too hard. They call it the sky-like mind, open, vast, unmoving. It's always present, but your thoughts, especially striving thoughts, cloud it like fog. And here's the twist. The more you try to clear the fog, the thicker it gets. This is why Dzogchen emphasizes non-meditation. Yes, meditation is part of the path. But the goal isn't to concentrate harder. It's not about stopping thoughts. It's about relaxing into awareness so deeply that the thoughts dissolve on their own. You stop struggling with them. You let them come and go, like waves in the ocean. And suddenly, you notice that the ocean was never disturbed. This is radical, because it means the peace you want doesn't come from fixing your mind. It comes from seeing that nothing was wrong with it to begin with. Non-striving also reveals how deeply fear is woven into our effort. We don't chase goals just because we love them. We often chase them because we're afraid of what will happen if we don't. Fear of failure, of being left behind, of not being loved, of being ordinary. And so we make effort our identity. We become the doer, the fixer, the achiever. But all of that masks a deep inner hungerer, yearning just to rest, to be enough without the resume, without the next big thing, to breathe without justifying it. Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki once said, "You are perfect just as you are, and you could use a little improvement." That's the balance. Yes, growth happens. Yes, you move forward. But not because you're broken. You improve because it's joyful, not because it earns you worth. When you drop striving, you don't become lazy. You become natural. Look at nature. Trees don't strain to grow. The moon doesn't try to shine. Rivers don't effort their way to the sea. They simply move according to their nature, and yet everything gets done. Seasons change, flowers bloom, life unfolds. You are part of nature too. You were never meant to hustle your way to peace. You were meant to remember who you are, then live from that truth. And that remembering happens in stillness, not in striving. This shift also transforms how you approach your goals, from needing them to fulfill you, to letting them express you. You may still write the book, build the company, heal your body, but the energy is different. You're not clinging, you're creating, not controlling, but dancing. This kind of effort is called effortless effort in Zen. It's the flow that comes when the ego steps back, when action arises spontaneously from presence, not from fear, but from alignment. And to reach this space, there are practices. Gentle, non-aggressive ones. Here are a few. First, do nothing on purpose. Schedule time to sit and literally do nothing. Not meditate, not journal, not scroll, just sit. Let the nervous system feel what it's like not to be managed. At first, it may feel uncomfortable. The mind will scream to be useful, to be productive. That's okay. Sit through it. Watch the panic rise and fall. Eventually, you'll discover something underneath. Stillness that doesn't depend on effort. A quiet joy that was always waiting. Second, label striving thoughts with kindness. Throughout your day, when you notice the inner push, I have to do this now. I'm behind. I need to be more. Just smile at it. Name it gently. Striving again. You're not fighting it. You're meeting it like a child throwing a tantrum. Not with anger, but with presence. That awareness starts to soften its grip. Third, practice non-fixing meditation. This is especially from Dzogchen. Sit quietly and allow everything to be as it is. Don't try to deepen your breath. Don't try to focus. Don't try to relax. Just watch. Be aware of the one who is aware. That's it. Every time the mind jumps in to fix or change, just return to that spacious witnessing. Let your awareness rest in itself, like a bird returning home. You'll begin to notice a subtle shift, tension melting, clarity arising not from control, but from release. Fourth, use paradox as your teacher. When you feel stuck, ask, what if the opposite is true? What if this obstacle is not blocking me, but guiding me? What if letting go gives me more power than trying harder? Don't answer right away. Let the question open something deeper, The mind won't understand it, but your being will. Fifth, walk slowly, not to get anywhere, but to arrive in the step itself. Let each foot touch the ground like it matters. Let walking become a meditation in non-striving. You're not going somewhere, you're being somewhere. This anchors you back into the moment where striving cannot survive. All of this is training you to stop measuring your life by effort alone. You're learning to move from inner spaciousness, to trust that life has its own intelligence. That things unfold, not always because you push but because you're aligned with something bigger than effort, truth. And here's the part most people miss. When you stop trying so hard, things start happening on their own. Opportunities come, ideas arrive, relationships feel less heavy. Not because you force them, but because your energy is cleaner, more magnetic, less resistant. Striving blocks the current, letting go lets it flow. This doesn't mean you'll never feel ambition again, or that you'll sit on a cushion for the rest of your life. No, it means your motivation will be rooted in peace, not fear. Your action will come from joy, not lack. And that changes everything. It changes how you speak to yourself, how you treat others, how you breathe in traffic, how you work, how you rest, even how you love. Because the heart, too, stops striving. It no longer tries to earn love or prove worth. It just opens, like a flower in the sun, not for reward, but because that's what it was meant to do. This is the paradox, that by letting go of the chase, you arrive. By softening your grip, you hold more. By doing less, you are more. And when that truth finally settles into your bones, when your body starts trusting what your mind can't yet explain, something beautiful happens. You stop running, and you start living. Welcome to the beginning of real freedom. Not the kind you chase, the kind that's been waiting for you all along. Quiet, still, just behind the effort, and now you're here. And just like that, space opens, the grip loosens. You're no longer trapped in the exhausting need to strive. But even in that stillness, something else lingers, quiet discomfort. A tendency to take things personally, to carry blame like a stone in your chest, to replay what happened, what they said, what you should have done. Peace whispers, but your mind pulls you back into stories, into why me and what now. This is where the next shift begins, not with more control, but with deeper understanding. There's a truth most people never get to hear, a teaching that dissolves the poison of blame not just toward others, but toward yourself. In Buddhist thought, it's called dependent origination. But don't let the words scare you. This isn't abstract philosophy, it's a doorway, a new lens that will help you walk through life without carrying every burden as if it were yours alone. This principle says nothing happens on its own, nothing arises from nothing. Every thought, every emotion, every action, every reaction, you, me, the world comes from a long chain of conditions, each one giving rise to the next. And when you really see this, blame begins to lose its shape. Judgment starts to fade. You stop holding others responsible for your pain. And you stop punishing yourself for things you never fully controlled. Think about any difficult moment you've had recently. A fight, a moment of guilt, a wave of anxiety. Now ask, did it just appear out of nowhere? Or was it built from 100 small conditions, past experiences, beliefs, emotions, words, timing? When you start to look closely, you see it was never just one thing. It was a system, a pattern, a web, and you were just one thread in that web. This doesn't mean you're powerless. It means you're not isolated. You're not a broken piece. You're part of something larger. And when you understand this, you stop reacting as if every moment is a personal attack or failure. Dependent origination is the end of "this happened to me." It's the beginning of "this arose because of this and that and that." Subtle but powerful. Blame collapses under this insight, because how can you fully blame someone who spoke out of their pain, which came from their past, which came from someone else's pain, and so on? And how can you keep blaming yourself when your habits, reactions, fears were all formed by things you never asked? For your childhood, your culture, your wiring. You're not excused from responsibility, but you're released from the illusion that you are the problem. In daily life, this awareness becomes your shield. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and instead of anger, there's curiosity. What conditions led to their behavior? Stress? Fear? Maybe they're carrying something heavier than you can see. You don't excuse harm, but you stop feeding the fire of outrage. You protect your peace by seeing clearly. When someone misunderstands you, instead of spiraling into, "Why don't they get me?" you pause. You see their reaction as a chain. Maybe they were raised to fear conflict. Maybe they carry wounds around rejection. Their view of you has more to do with their past than your worth. And just like that, you don't have to argue your value anymore. Even in silence, dependent origination brings freedom. Let's say you're feeling low, that old weight returns. Instead of thinking, "What's wrong with me?" you start asking, "What conditions are present right now?" Maybe poor sleep, maybe a memory surfaced, maybe you're hungry or lonely. Now, instead of identifying with the emotion, you investigate it. You track its origin. And in doing that, you stop resisting it. You stop making it personal. This is how healing begins, not with dramatic breakthroughs, but with honest observation. You start to see how everything is connected, how your anger yesterday was shaped by an unmet need, how that need was shaped by a belief, and that belief came from a time when you were just trying to survive. The moment you see that, the anger softens, the shame melts. You're not the villain, you're the witness. And witnesses don't need to carry the story, they just need to see it clearly. In this clarity, responsibility changes shape. It's no longer about control, it's about care. You care for the conditions you can influence, without judging the ones you inherited. You begin to clean up the inner environment, not by force, but by attention. That's the secret most people miss. Attention is what transforms the system. What you watch with gentleness begins to shift on its own. This principle also changes how you see your relationships. You stop expecting others to be flawless. You see their reactions as echoes. Their silence, their defensiveness, their control, it's all coming from somewhere. You don't have to tolerate abuse, but you also don't need to take everything personally. You gain the ability to set boundaries without hatred, to walk away without bitterness, to forgive without forgetting. Because now, you see the whole picture, not just the moment of pain. Even decisions feel lighter under this lens. No longer do you get paralyzed by, "What if I choose wrong?" You realize that choices don't happen in isolation. They're shaped by everything before them. And once made, they shape what comes next. There's no final verdict, just a flow. So you move forward with care, but not with fear. And when you mess up, which you will, you won't spiral into shame. Instead, you'll ask, "What was present in me when I did that? Was I scared? Was I reacting to something older than this moment? What belief led me there?" Then, gently, you work with that belief. You shift the conditions. And in doing so, you change the future not through punishment, but through presence. This is also how compassion deepens. Because once you see the chains inside yourself, you start seeing them in everyone. You stop labeling people as good or bad. You see them as conditioned, as complex, as human. And you hold space, not because you're better, but because you understand. Even your goals begin to shift. You stop asking, "How can I get what I want?" and start asking, "What needs to change in the system so that peace can arise?" You stop trying to force outcomes. You start adjusting conditions, like tending to soil instead of forcing a flower to bloom. Growth becomes a side effect of care. In this way, mindfulness becomes your daily tool. But not the kind that means obsessing over every breath. The kind that means watching the chain, gently seeing what feeds what causes what. Where resistance lives, where kindness is missing. Mindfulness becomes your map, helping you trace back the patterns without judgment. And with this map, you navigate life differently, no longer reactive, no longer rigid. When discomfort arises, you don't suppress it, you follow it back to its source. Maybe a fear of being unlovable, maybe an old betrayal. And from that place, healing happens. Not all at once, but layer by layer. This work is quiet, inward, but its effects ripple out. You speak softer, you hold people lighter, you let moments pass through without gripping them. You become less entangled in stories and more grounded in reality. And this reality becomes more beautiful, because now nothing is wasted. Every challenge becomes insight, every pattern becomes a teaching, every emotion becomes a message, a problem. And the more you see life this way, the less you fight it. Because now you understand, it's all unfolding through conditions. And you can meet those conditions, shape them, tend to them not through force, but through presence. Even your past transforms. Not because it changes, but because your relationship to it does. You stop asking why it happened. You stop blaming who caused it. You see the system, the ripple, the conditions that led to conditions, and you begin to hold your past with gentleness, like something precious, even if painful, because it brought you here. And here is where awareness lives. This is why Buddhism doesn't offer comfort through fantasy. It offers clarity through insight. It says, don't escape the world, understand it, see it as it is. And in that seeing, you'll stop resisting it, you'll stop needing it to be different, because you'll see that everything you thought was personal was actually part of a vast, moving pattern. And when that truth settles, something extraordinary happens. You start living lighter. You start meeting people where they are, not where you wish they were. You start allowing moments to come and go without pulling them into your identity. You become soft but clear, open but grounded, present but unattached. And in that way of living, peace is no longer something you search for. It's something that arises naturally when blame dissolves, and only understanding remains. Now that you've seen the hidden patterns behind life's chaos, the next step becomes clear. Shift from judgment to curiosity, from resistance to relationship. You're no longer walking through the world with clenched fists. You're moving with open hands, open eyes, and a quiet, unwavering heart. And what unfolds next will feel different, not because the world changes, but because the lens you're using finally lets the light in. When you begin to see life through the lens of interconnected causes, you stop blaming people and you stop blaming yourself. The heaviness of judgment starts to fade. But even after blame dissolves, another question quietly remains. If life is all conditions, then why do some things keep repeating? Why do certain emotions return like seasons, even when you try to change? Why does it feel like some patterns are stitched into your skin? This is where the conversation shifts into karma. Not the version you've heard before, not the one that sounds like punishment or fate or moral accounting. The real teaching is more alive than that. Karma isn't a system of rewards and penalties, it's a flow, a current, a chain of causes moving through you, shaping your life with every action, every word, every thought. It's not about blame. It's about energy. Karma means action, but not just physical action, energetic imprint. Every moment of intention plants a seed. Some seeds sprout quickly, others rest in the soil for years. Some feel like consequences, others like coincidences. But beneath the surface, it's all movement, a momentum that gathers when the same choices are made again and again. This is why certain emotional loops feel so familiar, why you can leave a job, a city, even a relationship, and still find yourself facing the same frustration or heartbreak. It's not because you're cursed. It's because the energy you carry hasn't shifted. The outer world changes, but the frequency of your actions, your reactions, your beliefs, they hum the same song, and life echoes that sound back. Karma doesn't punish, it reflects, it mirrors the energy you offer, not to shame you but to help you see, to reveal what's still active inside, what still needs healing, what stories are still writing your behavior. If you yell at someone in anger, the karma isn't that someone yells back. The karma is that you strengthen the habit of anger, and that habit creates a world where anger feels normal, where it returns easily, like a well-trodden path. But here's the power in this. If karma is energy, then it can be shifted. You're not locked into a script. You're not doomed to repeat your past. The flow can be redirected the moment you become conscious. The moment you choose a different response. Every small choice rewrites the energy you carry. And the key lies in awareness, not in effort, not in moral self-policing. Karma changes when you bring presence to the moment before action, that subtle space where intention lives. Before the word leaves your mouth, before the thought becomes a reaction, before the old pattern takes over, in that pause, a door opens, and through that door, new energy can move. One of the most overlooked truths is that karma is not linear. It's not simple cause and effect, like dropping a stone and watching it fall. It's layered, complex, woven into systems, families, cultures. You may carry the karma of generations, not as punishment, but as inheritance. Patterns passed down, not through blood alone, but through behavior, belief, silence. This is why healing yourself heals more than just you. It interrupts cycles that may have begun long before your lifetime. And yet, karma is deeply personal, because while you may inherit the current, you can choose how to meet it. You can face the wave with resistance or with presence. You can repeat the pattern or start to unthread it. Awareness is your oar, and choice is your compass. This also means that judgment becomes useless, not just toward others, but toward yourself. Regret loses its grip when you understand that the mistakes you made were part of unconscious patterns, not excuses but explanations. The more you understand the system, the less you need to hate the parts of yourself that acted from fear, from confusion, from habit. You begin to shift not through guilt, but through understanding. And understanding creates space, space to choose again, space to respond differently, space to slow down the karmic cycle not by force, but by seeing. You notice the pull to argue, and instead you breathe. You feel the fear rising, but instead of running, you sit with it. These moments may look small on the outside, but they are energetic revolutions. The karma that once moved you now pauses, and in that pause, something new is born. The most powerful karmic shift happens when you stop reacting and start listening, listening to what the moment is really asking. Often, we act out of habit not because it's what we want, but because it's what we've always done. You people, please not because it brings joy, but because you fear rejection. You withdraw not because you prefer solitude, but because you learned connection feels unsafe. These are karmic echoes. The goal is not to fight them, but to feel them fully, without identifying. And when you do, you stop feeding the loop. You stop adding fuel to the fire. The old energy dissolves not overnight, but gradually, like untying a knot that's been there for decades. With each breath of awareness, the threads loosen, the pattern weakens, and eventually, it fades. This is why karma isn't about good or bad. It's about clarity. There is no reward for being good. There is reflection. If you give with attachment, the energy of need comes back. If you speak with love, the energy of warmth spreads. The universe doesn't keep score, it keeps resonance, and you are the source of the frequency. But what about when life hits hard through illness, betrayal, grief? Are those karmic punishments? No, they are experiences shaped by countless visible and invisible causes. Some karmic, some circumstantial, some biological. Buddhism doesn't say, "You deserve this." It says, "This arose, and now, how will you meet it?" Even pain carries karmic potential, not because suffering is noble, but because it slows you down. It opens the heart. It reveals what truly matters. And if you meet it with presence, it can alchemize the energy of fear into wisdom. Not every wound is a punishment. Some are thresholds. Karma also applies to thought, not just action. The energy of your inner world creates ripples. If your thoughts are harsh, critical, rushed, that becomes your atmosphere. It shapes your body, your relationships, your attention. But the moment you change the tone, add softness, curiosity, spaciousness, you begin to shift the air around you. The pattern begins to dissolve. And life reflects that shift in the smallest, quietest ways. This is the practice. Watch your energy, not to control it, but to know it. Notice when you tighten, when you rush, when you close. That's karma moving. That's the old current. Now, with awareness, soften, breathe, choose differently. One breath is enough to redirect years of momentum. And when you fall back into the loop which you willed and collapse into shame, karma is not a straight line, it's a spiral. You'll revisit the same places, but with new eyes. What used to control you will now be something you can watch, and eventually something you can smile at. The spiral softens each time you meet it with care. And this care begins to affect everything: the way you speak, the way you touch a doorknob, the way you walk into a room. Energy is everywhere. Your presence ripples, and people feel it. You stop needing to convince anyone of anything, because the frequency you carry speaks louder than your words. This is how karma becomes grace. Not grace from a God above, but from the unfolding of your own awareness. You stop being dragged by your history. You start shaping your future, not by controlling the world, but by caring for your energy in this moment, now. Karma is not law, it's movement. Karma is not morality, it's momentum. Karma is not fate, it's frequency. And the more you return to the stillness beneath all action, the more you see, you are not your past. You are the space where choice lives. This space is where transformation begins, not in massive changes, but in quiet presence. The courage to pause, the willingness to feel, the honesty to see your own patterns without shame, the softness to respond with care. In this space, karma isn't a burden, it's a path. Not a path you follow, a path you become. And with each step in presence, you leave different footprints behind. As karma unfolds through energy and not punishment, you start to feel the rhythm of your life differently. It's not a script you're trapped in, it's a vibration you can tune. But even as you shift that energy, daily life can feel overwhelming. The world keeps spinning, distractions multiply, emotions swell without warning, the mind scatters, and your clarity fades. You begin to sense that insight alone is not enough. You need something solid to return to, something that holds you steady when everything around you feels uncertain. This is where form becomes essential. There is a quiet wisdom in repetition, in structure, in ritual, not as a cage, but as a ground. In modern life, structure often feels like control. Routine is dismissed as boring. Discipline is confused with rigidity. But in Buddhist practice, ritual is none of these things. It is presence, stabilized. A form is not there to limit your freedom. It exists to catch you when your mind starts to drift. It is a shape that holds your awareness so it can deepen, not escape. You can't always control the chaos of the world, but you can create containers within it, small, sacred shapes that hold your attention. And when you return to them, not because you have to, but because you choose to, You begin to build trust with yourself. You begin to remember who you are before the world distracts you. This is the role of ritual. It invites you to return. It reminds you of stillness, not with effort, but with rhythm. In Buddhist monasteries, everything is ritualized. Waking up, bowing, eating, cleaning, all done with presence, intention, and care. Not because monks can't live without order, but because these forms reduce internal friction. When the body knows what to do, the mind doesn't need to wander. Structure becomes a channel through which awareness can flow more freely. You may not live in a monastery, but the same principle applies. When your day has no shape, it becomes harder to meet each moment with clarity. You're always deciding, always reacting, always shifting. But when you choose even a small structure, lighting a candle before meditation, walking the same path each morning, closing your day with a bow, you begin to build a rhythm that supports presence. Rituals are not about performance, they're about grounding. They create a space that signals, now, I return to myself. Even a single breath, taken at the same time each day, can become a ritual. It doesn't need to be dramatic. It only needs to be repeated with care. And repetition is powerful not because it's new, but because it deepens. Every time you return to a ritual, you return a little differently. The form stays the same, but you change. And this meeting between the unchanging and the changing becomes a mirror. It shows you where your mind is. It reveals how much resistance you carry. It gives you a place to rest that doesn't depend on how you feel. Most people resist form because they fear losing freedom. But the truth is, without form, the mind becomes chaotic. Choices become endless. Energy is wasted. In contrast, when your life has rhythm, your energy becomes focused. You don't have to think about what's next. You just step into it. And that simplicity brings peace. Even creativity flourishes with form. Artists, musicians, dancers, they all work within structure, scales, steps, frames. It's not the structure that limits the expression. It's the structure that allows the expression to grow. The same applies to inner practice. Your awareness needs a vessel, and rituals are those vessels. In Zen, sweeping the floor is meditation. Washing the bowls is mindfulness. There is no separation between the sacred and the mundane. What matters is the quality of attention. And form helps cultivate that attention, especially when life feels scattered. Think about how much energy is lost in transition, in the blur between tasks, in the rush from one moment to the next. Ritual slows you down. It marks time. It gives you entry points. Without it, you slip from moment to moment without noticing. But with even a few deliberate rituals, you pause, you arrive, you re-enter the now. This kind of structure becomes especially important in times of difficulty. When the mind is overwhelmed, having a form to follow, however small, can be life-saving. Something you can do even when your motivation is gone. A pattern that holds you when everything else feels uncertain. Ritual is also an antidote to craving. When you move through the same form again and again, you begin to see the mind's desire for novelty. You hear the thoughts that say, "This again? I'm bored." But instead of obeying that voice, you stay, you breathe, and slowly that hunger for stimulation fades. What replaces it is depth, subtlety, peace. Even the resistance itself becomes part of the ritual. You meet it, you bow to it, you include it. And by doing so, you begin to soften the part of you that always needs something new, something more. This softening spreads. It seeps into how you eat, how you speak, how you walk. Each act becomes a thread in the fabric of mindfulness. And you begin to see that your entire life can become a ritual, not in the rigid sense, but in the sacred one, not bound by rules, but guided by reverence. Ritual also connects you to lineage. Every time you bow, or chant, or sit, you're joining a river of practice that stretches back for centuries. You're not alone. Others have sat here. Others have walked this path. The form carries their energy, and in that connection, you feel supported even if no one else is around. But you don't have to use ancient rituals to receive this support. You can create your own. A quiet cup of tea before sunrise, writing down one sentence of gratitude each night, touching your heart before speaking. These forms, if held with sincerity, become anchors. They remind you that peace doesn't need to be sought, it needs to be remembered. And the remembering is easier when your life has shape. Structure also protects your practice. When emotions rise, when old habits pull at you, when the world distracts you, may not always feel like showing up. But if the form is there, you don't have to feel like it. You just return to the shape. And that shape, over time, becomes a refuge. Not because it always feels good, but because it holds you steady when nothing else can. This is how ritual strengthens discipline, not as force, but as devotion. You're not pushing, you're returning, not out of fear, but out of care. Because you've seen what happens when you drift, and you've tasted what it's like to be rooted. Over time, the distinction between ritual and life fades. Every gesture becomes a chance to meet the moment fully. Opening a door, folding a shirt, washing your face. These become offerings not to a god, but to awareness itself. You begin to see that there is no ordinary act, only ordinary attention. This shift doesn't require a temple, it requires consistency, simplicity, the willingness to give yourself to what you're doing, even when it feels small, especially when it feels small. Because those are the moments that build the foundation, that slowly change your relationship to time, to space, to effort. Ritual also reveals your patterns. If you approach a daily practice and find resistance, boredom, restlessness, those emotions don't come from the ritual, they come from within. And now you can see them. You can work with them. You can understand yourself more deeply through the mirror of repetition. Over time, you'll come to value simplicity. You'll begin to see the power of knowing what comes next. Not because you need control, but because rhythm brings freedom. In chaos, you grasp. In structure, you settle. And that settling brings you into alignment, not just with yourself, but with life. You begin to move with the seasons, with the breath, with the day. You start to feel the quiet joy of living in sync, of not fighting the flow. When people say they want to feel more present, what they often need is not more insight, it's more rhythm. A body that knows where to go, a mind that has a home to return to, and rituals create that home, not by forcing you to stay, but by welcoming you back. Even when you miss a ritual, the memory of it works in your favor. It reminds you what it feels like to be centered, and that memory draws you back. Not with guilt, but with longing. Because once you've felt what it's like to live inside a structure that supports your peace, you want to return. Not to escape life, but to meet it more fully. And that is what ritual does. It doesn't take you out of the world, it roots you more deeply in it. So you can meet every moment not with control, but with care. Not with resistance, but with rhythm. Not with chaos, but with calm. It's not about doing more. It's about doing with presence, and that presence, held within form, becomes your practice, your path, your peace. The steadiness of ritual shows you how to stay present, even when life feels messy. It brings form to the formless, giving your awareness a rhythm it can rest inside. But even with structure and care, one subtle habit still lingers in the background, the mind's constant storytelling. It doesn't just describe your experience, it filters, distorts, interprets, judges. Without realizing it, you're not meeting the moment, you're meeting the version your mind has already edited. This is where a deeper invitation appears, one that asks not for effort, not for meaning, not even for comfort, but for truth. Not the kind built from opinions or explanations, the kind that's already here, quiet and complete, underneath everything you think about it. In Buddhism, this is called tathata, translated as suchness. It points to what reality is before the mind interferes, not what you want it to be, not what you're afraid it is, but simply what is. Suchness is the end of the story, not because you suppress it, but because you see through it. You realize the story is something the mind adds afterward. The event happens, then the mind wraps it in meaning. Someone leaves, and the story says you're not enough. A plan falls apart, and the story says you failed. A feeling rises, and the story says something's wrong with you. But if you pause before the story takes hold, what's really there? A sound, a sensation, a breath, a flicker of emotion, just raw experience, unshaped. Suchness asks you to meet that rawness directly, without the overlay, without the commentary. This isn't about detaching from life. It's about dropping into it more honestly, before labeling, before fixing, before deciding what it means. And in that directness, there's peace, no, because the moment becomes pleasant, but because it becomes real. You stop needing it to be different. You start allowing it to be what it already is. When you practice seeing the suchness of things, you stop turning your experiences into identity. The mind says, "This happened, therefore I am." But suchness interrupts that loop. This happened, that's it, no extra meaning, no self-judgment, just the happening, passing through. This shift creates space between what arises and what you make of it. And that space is freedom. You begin to notice how quickly the mind adds labels to everything. This is good, that's bad, this is unfair, that shouldn't have happened. These labels feel automatic. But they're not truth, they're habits. And they reinforce resistance, because the moment you judge something, you push against it. You try to change it, deny it, escape it. And the resistance makes the pain louder. But what if nothing needs a label? What if anger is just energy rising? What if sadness is just heaviness in the chest? Not good or bad, not failure or flaw. Just suchness, life expressing itself, moment by moment. You're not being asked to pretend emotions aren't real. You're being asked to feel them without building a narrative, to experience them cleanly, fully, before your mind turns them into a self-portrait. This is subtle but life-changing, because the story is what keeps suffering alive. The emotion rises, then the mind grabs it, spins it, clings to it. But when you stay with the raw experience, without naming, without resisting it, moves through, it dissolves. Suchness doesn't mean passive acceptance. It means honest contact. You can still act, speak, respond, but your response comes from clarity, not from a tangled story. And that clarity softens everything. Even beauty becomes more vivid when you stop trying to define it. You're not chasing meaning anymore. You're letting meaning dissolve. What's left is intimacy. With this breath, with this sound, with this texture of now. Even the mind's stories become suchness when you see them clearly. The thought arises, "I'm failing." Instead of believing it, you witness it. A thought, like a cloud. No need to fight it or follow it, just another shape passing through awareness. This is not detachment, it's deep recognition. Suchness reveals that you don't need certainty to be at peace. You don't need a reason for everything. You don't need to fix the past or predict the future. You only need to be here, without dressing this moment in a costume of explanation. And when the mind tries to pull you into the story, you come back not with force, but with softness. The texture of the air, the shape of your breath, the sound of silence beneath thought. These are doors back into what is. Suchness is also a practice of humility. It teaches you to stop thinking you know how life should be. The moment becomes the teacher, not your preferences, not your plans, but this exactly as it is. You stop fighting reality, and in that surrender, you find strength. This doesn't mean you never feel grief or anger or longing. It means you let those feelings be what they are, movements in awareness. Not mistakes, not weaknesses, just currents. You ride them with presence instead of drowning in the story they try to tell. Even language begins to soften under suchness. You stop labeling yourself in fixed terms. I'm an anxious person. I'm not spiritual enough. I'm always like this. These are stories. You don't need them. You are not a static thing. You are an open field where experiences come and go. The more you rest in that field, the more you stop confusing movement with identity. Suchness also reveals how often we confuse judgment with truth. You might think, this situation is a disaster, but is it, or is that just the mind's version? When you strip the judgment, what's really there? Maybe just change, maybe uncertainty, maybe newness. Without the overlay, you begin to relate to life instead of arguing with it. And this is the heart of suchness. It removes argument from your experience. Not because you give up, but because you no longer need to be right. You no longer need life to align with your expectations in order to be okay. Suchness is not resignation. It's awakening, a turning toward, a soft, steady willingness to meet life as it shows up, not as you wish it would. And this willingness spreads. It touches how you see other people. You stop reducing them to the stories in your mind. She's like this. He always does that. These thoughts lose their grip. You begin to meet people freshly, as they are now, not as they were last week, not as your memory shaped them, but as living beings, always changing. Even conflict shifts. You don't have to agree with someone to see their suchness. You don't have to like someone to recognize their humanity. Suchness breaks down the illusion of separation. The moment becomes a shared space, not a battleground. And in this shared space, compassion becomes effortless. You're not being kind because you're supposed to. You're kind because there's nothing in the way. The story has dropped, and what's left is connection. Even your relationship with time starts to dissolve. The future loses its grip. The past becomes lighter. You're not constantly referencing what was or what might be. You're here, in contact with the unfolding, and that contact feels whole, nothing missing, nothing extra. This is the deep rest that suchness offers. Not escape, but presence without pressure, without the need to be more, to understand more, to explain more, just being, fully, clearly. Suchness is not a place you arrive. It's a way you see, a way you meet life again and again with open eyes and no commentary. And when that becomes your habit, something else arises. Gratitude, not the kind you list in a journal, the kind that hums underneath your experience, quietly. Gratitude that doesn't need a reason. It comes from contact, from meeting life without the filter, and that contact is enough. This is the wisdom of suchness. Nothing to fix, nothing to hold, nothing to prove, just this, and it is always enough. The more you meet reality without the extra layers of judgment or story, the lighter everything begins to feel. You stop gripping so tightly, you stop filling every moment with commentary. But then something deeper becomes clear. Even without thoughts, the craving remains. A tug in the background, a hunger for more. Not just more thoughts, but more stuff, more comfort, more stimulation. That endless reaching that says what's here is not enough. This is the root of resistance, hidden beneath everything else, the belief that happiness lies somewhere else, in something else, in the next thing. Voluntary simplicity begins where that craving ends, not because you've lost desire, but because you've begun to see through it. Simplicity, in this sense, isn't a lifestyle trend or an aesthetic choice. It's an act of inner liberation, a decision to stop feeding the endless appetite for what you don't need. It's the recognition that accumulation, both outer and inner, doesn't bring peace, it delays it. When you choose simplicity consciously, you're not punishing yourself. You're honoring clarity. You're recognizing that not everything that's available adds value, that more choices don't always bring more freedom, that more possessions don't guarantee more contentment. Often, they clutter the space where calm might have entered. Voluntary simplicity is the refusal to be pulled in 1,000 directions by wants that never end. It's the ability to discern between what is essential and what is distraction. And that discernment grows sharper each time you pause before adding more, each time you let the desire rise and fall without obeying it. This is not about being harsh, it's not about removing joy. It's about making space for the kind of joy that doesn't come from consumption, but from presence. Simplicity helps you touch that joy more often. Because without the noise of more, you start to hear the quiet satisfaction of enough. And that enoughness is powerful. When you begin to live from that space, the world no longer controls your sense of peace. You're not riding the waves of desire and disappointment. You're not constantly rearranging your life to chase the next comfort. Instead, you're anchored in what is already sufficient, in what nourishes without demanding. Voluntary simplicity also protects your attention. Every possession you own, every subscription, every notification, it all makes a small demand, a pull, a voice asking to be noticed. When you simplify, you quiet those voices. You reclaim your awareness, and what you gain is focus, presence, energy. This practice doesn't require you to give up everything. It requires you to question what you've assumed you need, not from guilt, but from care. What truly supports your well-being? What clutters your space, your schedule, your mind? What have you held on to out of fear or habit? Start with what surrounds you. A drawer full of things unused for years. A closet crowded with identities you no longer wear. A calendar filled with obligations that no longer reflect who you are. Begin to notice how each item, each yes, either frees your energy or binds it. Then move inward. What stories are you carrying that no longer serve you? What mental routines pull you out of now and into a maze of wanting? What assumptions tell you more is better? Faster is success. Busier is proof that you matter. Voluntary simplicity is the quiet act of letting go of all that noise, not to become empty, but to become clear. And in that clarity, you begin to see what truly supports you, what brings ease, what brings depth, what brings peace without a price. This shift also touches how you relate to money, time, and consumption. Instead of chasing wealth to secure your worth, you begin to ask, what is enough? Instead of filling every hour with productivity, you begin to ask, what matters? Instead of buying to soothe discomfort, you begin to ask, what am I avoiding? You stop trying to fix your inner world with external solutions. You stop trying to solve dissatisfaction by adding more to your life. You recognize that most craving is a misunderstanding, not a need, but a habit. Simplicity is the breaking of that habit. And the break happens not through denial, but through mindfulness. When you pause before reaching for the next thing and you ask, is this true nourishment or just distraction? You begin to move differently. You move with care, with awareness, with purpose. This kind of simplicity also changes your relationships. You stop needing people to fulfill roles. You stop collecting connections to feel valid. You start valuing depth over number, honesty over approval, presence over performance. The way you speak becomes simpler, more real, less tangled in appearance, more rooted in sincerity. Even how you hold emotions shifts. You stop needing to fix every feeling. You stop layering your pain with interpretations. You allow emotions to rise and fall with less commentary. That too is simplicity, the willingness to feel what's here without making it more complicated. And over time, simplicity becomes a kind of strength, a quiet confidence in your ability to stand in the storm without grabbing for something to hold. You know how to rest in less. You know how to meet discomfort without reaching for noise. You know how to say no without guilt, and yes without needing applause. This strength is not loud, it's not flashy, but it is stable. It's the strength of a tree that no longer reaches outward for validation. It grows by going inward, downward, into its roots. Voluntary simplicity is how you grow roots. It's how you stop chasing and start being, how you stop gathering and start settling, how you stop reacting and start choosing. You begin to experience contentment not as a reward, but as a baseline, not as a peak moment, but as a steady state. You're not waiting for the next thing to go right. You're not delaying peace until the next goal is reached. You're here, now, living within your chosen limits, and discovering that those limits create space. Space to breathe, space to think, space to feel, space to rest. And in that space, you meet a version of yourself that was always present beneath the clutter, a self that is not built from accumulation, but from awareness, from being, from enoughness. That self doesn't need decoration, doesn't need to impress, doesn't need to explain why it chooses less, because less is not deprivation, it is refinement. It is listening closely to what actually supports life and releasing the rest. This refinement affects how you move through the world. You consume more consciously, you speak with more care, you walk slower, you notice details, you honor silence. You stop needing everything to be stimulating, entertaining, exciting. You find peace in the plainness of the moment. You become someone who can sit in an empty room and feel full. This is not withdrawal from life. It is intimacy with it. Without distraction, you experience more. Not more stimulation, but more clarity. You hear subtler sounds. You feel deeper emotions. You see what was once missed in the noise. Voluntary simplicity turns your entire life into a meditation, not because you sit longer, but because you carry less. Each thing you own, each thought you keep, each commitment you accept, they all become choices, not reflexes. And with each choice, you return to what matters. You stop trying to be everything, and you start being whole, not fragmented by excess, not stretched by craving, but integrated, clear, quiet. This is the liberation simplicity offers, not by stripping life bare, but by revealing what's always been beneath the surface. Stillness, presence, peace, and a deep, steady joy that needs no decoration. When life is simplified, when craving softens and distractions fall away, something unexpected rises to the surface. Expectation, not the loud kind, but the quiet one hidden in the background of thought, woven into almost every interaction, gesture, and plan. These are the assumptions you didn't know you made. The silent rules you didn't realize you were following, and the moment they're unmet, a sharp tension appears, a sense of betrayal, confusion, or sorrow. This is the root of disappointment, not what happens, but what you expected instead. Expectations are tricky because they wear the mask of normality. You expect people to be kind, you expect plans to unfold smoothly. You expect yourself to meet every standard you've internalized over years. These beliefs seem reasonable until life doesn't agree. And when it doesn't, suffering begins. You feel let down, not because the moment is unbearable, but because it didn't match the image you were carrying. That image becomes a lens, and through it, reality always looks incomplete. In Buddhism, this pattern is called grasping. You're holding on to an outcome, a version of how things should go. And when they don't align, the tension comes not from life itself, but from your grip. The pain isn't just about what happened, it's about what you're still clinging to. Insight meditation offers a way through, not by forcing the mind to release expectations, but by seeing them clearly, again and again, until they lose their hold. The practice is to notice expectation as it arises. Not to judge it, not to argue with it, but to recognize it as a thought, just a thought, a projection, not a promise. When you sit in meditation and pay attention to the breath, You start to see how often the mind drifts toward imagining the future. It plans, predicts, anticipates. It builds subtle scripts for how things will unfold. And when the present moment doesn't match those scripts, the reaction is immediate. Disappointment, irritation, sadness. But none of that was necessary. The moment didn't fail you. The script just wasn't real. Insight means looking, not with force, but with presence. You learn to watch the feeling of expectation, the sensation it brings to the body. Sometimes it's a tightening in the chest, a clenching in the jaw, a leaning forward as if trying to speed up time. And the moment you see it clearly, something softens, the grip loosens. You stop living in the gap between what is and what was imagined. This doesn't mean abandoning hope or becoming passive. It means replacing expectation with openness. You can still set intentions, still make plans, but you do so lightly. You meet each moment with curiosity instead of demands. You stop framing life in terms of should, and you start receiving it as it unfolds. One of the most powerful insights is that expectations are often shaped by fear. The mind creates imagined outcomes as a way to feel in control. If you know how things will go, you feel safer. But this safety is an illusion, and it costs you your freedom. Because now your peace depends on life staying within your imagined lines. The more you practice insight meditation, the more you see that most moments don't actually bring suffering. What brings suffering is the comparison. You compare what's here to what should have been. You compare who you are to who you think you're supposed to be. And in that comparison, peace is lost. But when you sit with what is, just as it is, without commentary, you begin to notice the richness that was hidden beneath expectation. You hear sounds you used to ignore. You feel sensations that used to seem unimportant. You connect to the directness of experience, and that connection is enough. Expectations also distort relationships. You enter conversations with assumptions about how others should respond. When they don't match that script, conflict arises not because they were unkind, but because they didn't fit the role your mind cast for them. You expect appreciation, understanding, validation. When it doesn't come, you feel unseen. But what if you could meet each person without that weight? What if every interaction was a meeting of presence, not a transaction of needs? This isn't about being indifferent. It's about being free. Free to let people be as they are. Free to let life unfold without constant evaluation. Free to experience disappointment without turning it into identity. Insight meditation helps you see that disappointment itself is just a wave. It rises, crests, and fades. You don't need to hold on to it. You don't need to resist it. You just need to be present with it as a temporary event in awareness. And the more you do this, the less power it holds. You also begin to recognize that expectations are not just about others. You place them on yourself constantly. You expect to feel a certain way, to perform at a certain level, to be consistent, productive, calm, loving. And when you're not, the judgment comes quickly. You turn natural fluctuation into failure. But these expectations were never fair. They were internalized, standards often unexamined, often impossible. When you release these internal demands, you create space for self-compassion. You allow yourself to be human, imperfect, fluctuating, changing. You stop chasing an ideal and start meeting your experience with kindness. This shift has practical effects. You stop overcommitting. You stop forcing energy when it's not there. You stop treating rest as weakness. And in that space, your natural rhythm returns. You become more balanced, more whole. In a deeper sense, releasing expectations also transforms your relationship with time. Most expectations live in the future. They pull you out of the present and place your happiness in a distant version of it. But the future never arrives the way you planned, and even when it does, it quickly becomes the new present and the cycle starts again. By watching this process through meditation, You learn to catch it in real time. You notice when the mind leaps ahead, when it starts crafting outcomes, and instead of following it, you come back. Back to breath, back to sensation, back to now. This doesn't erase your goals, it grounds them. You work toward them without becoming tangled in them. You take each step without needing to control the result. You move with effort, not strain. And when life surprises you, when plans fall apart, when people change, when results don't come, you meet that moment without collapse. You feel the loss, but you don't become it. You feel the wave, but you don't drown. You may still feel disappointment, but you see it for what it is, the gap between what was expected and what is. And when you stop feeding that gap with stories, it closes on its own. Even joy becomes simpler. It's no longer dependent on something special happening. It comes from the freshness of experience, from presence that isn't filtered by assumptions. In this space, peace becomes accessible, not in the future, not after everything goes right, but now, because the tension that blocked it, the expectation has been seen through. And what remains is life, raw and unfiltered, sometimes messy, sometimes beautiful, always real. This is the invitation, to live without the constant measurement, to replace expectation with attention, to meet life as it is, not as your mind says it should be. And in that meeting, to find a kind of freedom you never had while clinging to imagined outcomes. This is not easy, it's not instant, but it is possible, and every time you sit, every time you return to breath, every time you pause before reacting, you weaken the grip of expectation. You strengthen the muscle of presence. Eventually, the stories fade, the tension melts, and you realize peace was never waiting in the next moment. It was here, underneath the assumptions, all along. When expectations dissolve, something else becomes visible, something that was always there, but hidden beneath the noise of wanting, the shifting tides of your own emotions. You begin to see that much of your inner life isn't shaped by what happens outside, but by the weather patterns moving through your mind and body. One moment you feel hopeful, the next restless, then quiet, then agitated. These moods come and go like changes in the wind. But the suffering comes not from the emotion itself, it comes from identifying with it. When sadness appears, the mind often says, "This is who I am now." When anger rises, it declares, "This is what I must act on." And so every feeling becomes a label, a role, a direction. You don't just feel, you follow, and in that following, you lose clarity. You become swept into the current, unaware that the current is temporary. Tibetan teachings offer a simple but powerful practice known as inner weather watching. It begins with one core insight. Your emotions are not fixed. They are not final. They are not you. They are whether temporary, changing, arising from causes, and passing away on their own. When you start seeing emotions this way, everything softens. You stop trying to escape what you feel. You stop needing to act on every mood. You start allowing experience to move through, just like clouds across a vast sky. The practice begins with recognition. You pause and name what is present, not as a statement of identity, but as a passing state. Instead of saying, "I am anxious," you say, "Anxiety is here." Instead of "I am angry," you notice, "Anger is moving through." This subtle shift changes everything. It creates space between you and the feeling. It reminds you that the storm is not the sky. This space is what gives you freedom. In that space, you can choose. You can respond instead of react. You can hold the emotion without letting it hold you. And that holding is not cold detachment. It's warmth. You meet the emotion like a guest, not an enemy. You listen without fusing with it. As the practice deepens, you begin to notice how emotions rise in the body first. Tightness in the chest, heat in the face, tension in the stomach. These sensations come before the story. But usually, the mind rushes in to interpret, explain, defend, attack. Inner weather watching slows this process down. You stay with the body, you stay with the feeling, without rushing to conclusions. Sometimes what you feel won't even have a name. It's just energy, movement, and that's okay. You don't need to define it. You just stay present, breath by breath. You allow it. You give it room to rise and fall naturally. This is not about control. You're not trying to stop the weather. You're learning how to remain grounded within it. Just like a mountain doesn't move when the clouds pass overhead, your awareness doesn't move when emotions come and go. You watch without pushing away and without clinging. Over time, you begin to see patterns. You notice which emotions return most often. You see what triggers them. You see what they try to protect. Sometimes anger is guarding hurt. Sometimes fear hides beneath control. And when you see this, your compassion grows. You stop fighting what you feel. You start understanding it. Inner weather watching also teaches patience. You learn that no state lasts forever, even the ones that feel unbearable. If you sit through the storm without fueling it, it passes. Maybe not in 5 minutes. Maybe not in one sitting, but it changes, always. This truth brings relief. You no longer need to panic when heavy feelings arrive. You know they won't stay. This steadiness helps in daily life. A conversation that once triggered defensiveness now becomes an opportunity to pause. You notice the rising heat, but you don't speak from it. You breathe. You wait. You respond from clarity, not reaction. That one moment of watching changes the whole direction of a relationship. Even joy becomes more available, because when you're not gripping or resisting emotion, you're more present. You notice the subtle beauty of a quiet moment. You feel the lightness of laughter without fearing its end. You let happiness arise without trying to freeze it in place. The more you practice, the less threatened you feel by strong emotions. You don't need to fix them. You don't need to avoid them. You trust that your awareness is vast enough to hold them all. That trust makes you more stable, less shaken by every shift, more rooted in your own presence. This doesn't mean you'll never feel overwhelmed, but even in overwhelm, a small voice inside will remember, this too is weather. This too will pass. One helpful method is to use breath as your anchor. When a wave of emotion rises, return to your breath, not to escape, but to stay connected. The breath grounds you in the body, in the now. It gives the storm something steady to move around. Another technique is labeling. Softly, in your mind, name what's present, not with analysis, just awareness. Sadness, fear, tightness. This labeling brings attention to the experience without amplifying it. It gives you a tool to stay present without collapsing into the emotion. You can also practice noting the changes. Watch how one emotion gives way to another, how irritation fades into fatigue, how sadness gives way to stillness. Noticing these shifts reminds you of impermanence, and that reminder dissolves the belief that you're stuck. Over time, your whole way of relating to experience shifts. You stop seeing certain emotions as problems. You stop seeing others as rewards. You simply meet what is here with openness. That openness is not weakness. It's strength born from knowing that you don't need to control what you feel to remain steady. Even long-held emotional patterns begin to loosen, not because you forced them out, but because you stopped feeding them with reaction. What once dominated your life becomes something you can sit with, watch, understand. That understanding brings integration. The energy of the emotion is no longer split off or repressed. It becomes part of your wholeness. Inner weather watching is not about fixing yourself. It's about knowing yourself. Not the stories, but the raw, living energy underneath. And the more you know that energy, the more intimate you become with your own experience. You begin to feel like a safe place to be. You also become more available to others. Because you're no longer afraid of feeling, you can hold space when others are emotional. You don't need to fix them. You don't need to offer solutions. You can simply be there, steady, present, allowing. That presence is one of the most healing things you can offer. This practice also weakens the grip of shame. When you stop identifying with emotions, you stop judging yourself for having them. Anger doesn't mean you're bad. Fear doesn't mean you're weak. These are just movements in consciousness, whether temporary, impersonal, human. And that understanding allows you to forgive yourself more easily. You begin to see that many of your past reactions came from unprocessed storms. You weren't wrong. You were overwhelmed. Now, with new tools, you can meet the next storm differently. This gentleness ripples into everything. You become less reactive, more reflective, less hurried, more attuned, less afraid of intensity, more able to hold space within it. You're not escaping life. You're entering it more fully without being pushed around by every passing mood. You remain grounded, steady, clear, like a sky that welcomes the storm but is never disturbed by it. And eventually, you stop needing every day to be sunny. You stop needing every moment to feel good. You find peace in the middle of motion, not in perfection, but in presence. This is the freedom inner weather watching gives you, not by changing what you feel, but by changing how you see it. From identity to energy, from problem to process, from chaos to passing cloud. No longer ruled by storms, you start to live in the sky. As you learn to sit with emotions like weather passing, shifting, never permanent, something more profound begins to emerge. Beneath the waves of joy and sorrow, beyond the storms of fear and restlessness, there is a deeper current that rarely gets touched, not because it's hidden, but because it's avoided. The truth that all of this, every thought, every feeling, every body ends, not someday far off, but at a time completely unknown. And while the mind may try to turn away, this truth holds a doorway, one that leads not to despair, but to peace. This is the heart of Maranasati, the Buddhist practice of remembering death. It is not a ritual of darkness. It is not a reason to live in fear. It is a return to what's always been true, a way to wake up from distraction and see what actually matters. Because when you know you don't have forever, everything shifts. You stop pretending that small irritations are worth your energy. You stop delaying your care for others. You stop treating this moment like it's just another one in an endless stream. You begin to live fully, not by trying to escape death, but by including it. In this practice, death is not the enemy. It's the teacher. It reveals the fragile beauty of what's here. It clears away the illusion that anything can be possessed, clung to, or guaranteed. It opens the mind to reality as it is, uncertain, impermanent, precious. Reflecting on death softens attachment not by stripping away love, but by clarifying it. You start to see how much time is spent holding on to things you cannot keep. You cling to identity, to plans, to comfort, to control. But when you remember that all of this passes, you begin to loosen your grip. You breathe more freely. You love more purely. You stop needing to own the moment and start participating in it. Maranasati isn't about rehearsing tragedy. It's about cultivating presence through truth. In the same way you watch your breath during meditation, you turn your attention toward the fact that life has an edge, a limit, and you meet that limit with honesty. You don't try to escape it through fantasy or denial. You face it not to be morbid, but to become more awake. This kind of awareness brings equanimity, a calm that doesn't depend on things staying the same, a steadiness that can hold joy and loss in the same hand. You start to notice how resistance to death is often hidden in daily reactions. The need to be right, the fear of letting go, the push to control others, the worry over change. All of it comes from the same root: resisting impermanence. When you reflect on death, you begin to see how deeply that resistance runs. And with that seeing, you begin to release it. This doesn't happen through force. It happens through reflection. You take time each day, or whenever you remember, to sit with the simple truth. This life will end. These people I love, this body I move through the world with, this moment, it all will pass. The goal is not to make yourself sad, it's to sharpen your clarity, to bring immediacy to the present, to let gratitude rise, not as an idea, but as a direct experience of how rare and fleeting this moment is. When you touch this awareness, the way you respond to life changes. Small frustrations lose their power. Old grudges fall away. You stop expecting things to last forever, and that expectation was the root of suffering. Without it, there's room for peace. Even your goals begin to transform. You stop chasing them as if they will complete you. You move toward them because they feel true, now not because you're trying to secure something permanent. You live with intention, not urgency, with care, not obsession. This reflection also brings compassion. When you remember that everyone you meet will die, including those who upset you, it becomes harder to hold on to anger. You see the shared condition. You see the briefness of it all, and that awareness softens the heart. It doesn't make pain disappear, but it brings perspective. It reminds you that kindness is always the wiser path. Not because people deserve it, but because they won't be here forever. Maranasati also helps you prepare not for the moment of death itself, but for the practice of letting go. Every day holds a chance to rehearse that, letting go in small ways, letting go of control, letting go of being understood, letting go of how you thought things should go. These are not acts of giving up, they are acts of becoming free, because the more you resist the truth of impermanence, the more you suffer when it arrives. But when you begin to welcome it, not as something to be feared, but as something to be included, your relationship with life changes completely. You begin to trust more. You see that clinging doesn't protect you, it isolates you. And when you stop clinging, you open to the flow of life. You meet each moment with more sincerity, more depth, more love. Not because you're afraid to lose it, but because you've learned how to receive it without holding it hostage. Death contemplation also dissolves many of the fears that rule your decisions. Fear of failure, fear of embarrassment, fear of being seen. All of these lose their grip when you remember how temporary everything is. You don't become careless, you become courageous, willing to speak truth, willing to live fully, willing to release what no longer serves. This clarity is especially powerful in moments of change. When something ends, a job, a relationship, a chapter in your life, it can feel like a kind of death. And if you've never practiced facing endings, the resistance will be strong. But if you've trained yourself to meet impermanence with awareness, you'll move through those endings with more grace. Not pain-free, but grounded. Not without sadness, but without collapse. This also prepares you to hold others in their transitions. When someone is grieving, when someone is facing loss, your presence won't try to fix them. It will sit with them, steady and quiet, because you've done the work of meeting impermanence yourself. This presence is rare and powerful. It brings comfort, not because it solves anything, but because it allows the truth to be felt without panic. That's what Maranasati teaches: truth without panic, change without resistance, loss without collapse. Even joy becomes more available, because when you stop fearing its end, you can finally feel it, fully, without clinging, without turning it into a possession. You don't try to freeze a good moment. You simply meet it, feel it, and let it pass. This way, joy stays alive instead of becoming a memory you chase. You begin to live in a way that honors both the brevity and the brilliance of your life. You speak what needs to be spoken. You offer love without holding back. You forgive more easily, not because the past didn't hurt, but because you see how little time there is to keep carrying it. Every breath becomes more meaningful, not because it's dramatic, but because it's uncertain. You stop taking time for granted, and that awareness makes even the smallest moments sacred. This doesn't turn you into a detached observer. It makes you more alive, because when you stop avoiding death, you start truly living. You show up, you stay present, you love more openly, you rest more deeply, you suffer less, not because nothing hurts, but because you no longer resist the truth that all things change. Maranasati is not about fear, it's about freedom. Freedom from illusion, freedom from urgency, freedom from the endless push to secure something unshakable in a world that's always moving. It's a practice of remembering what matters, not in theory, but in your bones. And from that remembrance, you live differently. Not perfect, not always calm, but real, awake. And in that wakefulness, you find a peace that no amount of control ever gave you. Because the moment you stop pretending that life is permanent, you start to live a life that's fully your own. When you stop resisting impermanence, when you stop avoiding the truth of death, something softens inside. You no longer carry the same urgency. You no longer pretend that everything will last. And with that honesty, your heart becomes more open, life becomes more vivid. But not everyone you meet will reflect this softness back to you. Even as your inner world begins to calm, the outer world still brings conflict. People will still project, provoke, accuse. And in those moments, the mind may tighten again, old defenses may rise. The urge to retaliate or shut down may return quickly. This is where another path begins, a deeper practice that challenges the most instinctive reactions, a practice rooted in bodhicitta, awakened heart, the wish not just for your own freedom, but for the freedom of all beings, including those who hurt you, especially those who hurt you. Conflict exposes what still feels separate. When someone attacks, the reflex is to see them as the problem, as other. But bodhicitta sees differently. It doesn't deny the pain, but it holds the pain in a larger frame. It recognizes that behind every harmful act is suffering, behind every sharp word is fear. Behind every wall of anger is a heart that doesn't know how to stay open. This doesn't mean excusing harm or abandoning boundaries. It means responding without closing. Bodhicitta allows you to meet conflict without becoming hardened by it. It reminds you that the one who lashes out is not your enemy. They are a reflection of the same struggle you carry in quieter forms. You begin to see how often confrontation is simply two wounds speaking to each other. Neither side sees clearly. Each one is defending a story, a fear, a need, and in that clash, there's a chance to either deepen division or soften it, to either protect the self-image or dissolve it just enough to listen. This doesn't require perfection, it requires sincerity. In the moment of conflict, the mind wants to build a case, to argue, to protect, but the heart can do something else. It can stay curious. It can wonder what pain is moving behind those words. It can remember that suffering wears many masks: control, pride, silence, aggression. Bodhicitta trains you to look beyond the behavior and into the human. You don't have to agree with them, you don't have to feel warm, but you remain willing to see their dignity, even when it's buried. This willingness is not weakness. It is the courage to remain undefended in the face of harm, not to be passive, but to be present, to feel everything without numbing, to speak truth without hate, to stand your ground without making the other person an enemy. Sometimes this means saying nothing, not as silence that hides, but as silence that listens. Other times it means speaking directly, but from a place of clarity, not blame. You speak not to win, but to connect, not to dominate, but to understand. The most difficult part of this practice is when someone's pain triggers your own. Their rejection touches your fear. Their attack finds your wound. In those moments, the temptation to strike back is strong. But if you can pause, if you can breathe even once before responding, you begin to break the chain. You stop the momentum. You plant a seed of different energy. Bodhicitta also means understanding that liberation is not personal. You don't just want to be free from your suffering. You want to see a world where no one needs to act from theirs. This intention shifts how you move. You stop keeping score. You stop needing to be right. You start choosing actions that reduce suffering, even if they don't boost your pride. This is especially powerful when facing someone who refuses to change, someone who repeats harm, who refuses accountability. You may need to step away. You may need strong boundaries. But even then, bodhicitta remains. You still wish them peace. You still hold them as part of the same human story. You walk away, not with resentment, but with respect for your own path and theirs. This kind of compassion is not emotional softness. It is strength. The strength to remain open when it would be easier to shut down. The strength to keep seeing the whole picture when pain wants to narrow your vision. It's important to understand that bodhicitta is not a feeling, it's an intention. You don't have to feel love in the moment. You don't have to feel anything at all. What matters is the willingness to return, to keep planting the seed of compassion even when the soil is rocky, to keep choosing understanding even when anger feels justified. And this seed changes you. It reshapes your nervous system. The more you practice, the less quickly you escalate, the more able you are to stay with discomfort, the less attached you are to defending your identity. You don't lose your voice. You find a deeper one that doesn't shake with fear or rise from pride. This voice can say hard truths with clarity. It can speak boundaries with grace. It can even say goodbye when necessary without turning the other into a villain. Because bodhicitta doesn't mean staying in harm's way. It means not carrying hate when you leave. It also means forgiving yourself when you fall short, when you speak harshly, when you react instead of respond, when you forget and fight. Bodhicitta includes you, your wounds, your patterns, your own moments of blindness. You don't get excluded from the heart you're trying to expand. You are the practice too. Every conflict becomes an invitation, not to suppress, but to awaken, not to pretend, but to see more clearly. You begin to notice the moment your chest tightens, your breath shortens, your story solidifies. And in that noticing, you have a choice: to defend the self-image or to soften into presence. This doesn't mean you never hurt again, but your hurt doesn't harden you. It deepens your compassion. You remember that everyone is carrying something unseen, that no one gets through life without pain. And you begin to respond to others' behavior, not from what they did, but from what they must be feeling to act that way. This shift creates space even in the most difficult conversations. You stop needing to convince. You start listening more. You pause when the urge to correct rises. You trust that truth doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes it just needs to be steady. You also stop using compassion as a strategy. You don't act kindly to get a certain outcome. You do it because it's who you want to be. Because every time you meet conflict with presence, you strengthen the path toward peace. That peace ripples outward. It touches the people around you. It creates a field where others feel safe to be honest, to be vulnerable, to be human. Not because you solved their pain, but because you met it with something other than judgment. This is how bodhicitta transforms conflict from a battlefield into a place of practice. You no longer fear confrontation. You no longer see it as failure. You see it as another doorway into the heart. You begin to trust that compassion is not the opposite of strength. It is strength, the kind that endures, that sees clearly, that holds steady, the kind that refuses to give in to hatred even when it hurts, the kind that keeps showing up not to fix others, but to remain whole in the presence of division. This is the work, quiet, daily, imperfect, but powerful. Because every time you choose to respond with bodhicitta, every time you hold conflict in the light of compassion, you reshape the world, starting from the inside out. Even when compassion grows strong enough to hold conflict, a deeper challenge often follows. You begin to see people hurting. You hear the fear behind their anger, the sorrow beneath their silence. And with that awareness comes the impulse to step in, to rescue, to solve, to ease the discomfort not only for them, but for yourself. You want them to be okay. But if you're not careful, this caring turns into control. What looks like compassion becomes interference, and without realizing it, you begin to resist their pain instead of allowing it. This is where the practice shifts from speaking wisely to learning when not to speak at all. The wisdom of silence isn't passive, it's rooted in presence. In many Buddhist monastic communities, the deepest respect you can offer someone suffering is not advice, it's attention. You don't reach for a solution. You don't try to steer their growth. You sit, you listen, you stay close without crossing the line of their process. This kind of presence dismantles the part of you that needs others to feel better so that you can feel at ease. It exposes how much of what we call helping is actually a desire to fix discomfort we cannot control. When someone is grieving, or angry, or lost, your own discomfort rises, and the instinct is to fix the feeling rather than witness the person, but witnessing is often what's most needed. To truly listen means to stop placing your ideas between the other person and their experience. You don't interpret their pain. You don't make it about what you would do. You don't offer your own story in place of theirs. You simply allow their experience to exist exactly as it is, without shaping it. This restraint is a discipline. You learn to notice the urge to interrupt, to teach, to advise, and you let it pass. You learn to remain steady in the face of emotion without trying to manage it. Not because you don't care, but because you care enough to allow the other person to have their experience in full. Non-intervention does not mean emotional distance. It means inner stability. You trust that pain doesn't always need to be solved, that discomfort is not failure. That healing often begins with being seen, not being instructed. This is especially important when someone is in the middle of uncertainty, when their questions have no answers yet. The moment you step in to offer a conclusion, you close off their exploration. You interrupt their unfolding. But when you stay present without directing, you allow space for their own insight to arise. Sometimes, silence is the most honest answer. Not because you have nothing to say, but because your presence is saying everything. It's saying, I'm not afraid of your pain. I'm here. I'm not trying to change you. I trust your process. This level of trust requires letting go of your own agenda. You may want the person to feel better. You may want resolution. But you learn to sit with the unresolved without rushing it. You stop confusing helpfulness with urgency. You begin to understand that stillness is often the most generous thing you can offer. And as you practice this, your relationship to discomfort changes. You become less reactive. You stop needing to fill every silence. You stop needing to offer something wise or comforting just to feel useful. You realize that usefulness is not the same as presence. You begin to let go of the self that needs to be the healer. This isn't detachment, it's respect. Respect for the complexity of another's path. Respect for the intelligence of their heart. Respect for the way growth often happens slowly, beneath the surface, when no one is watching. In fact, the more silent presence you offer, the more others feel safe to open. They sense that they're not being evaluated, analyzed, or guided. They feel held without being handled. And that safety becomes the space where insight can emerge. This is how non-intervention becomes transformative. You're not offering answers, you're offering space. A space free from judgment, free from control, free from the pressure to be okay. And in that space, people often discover their own clarity because you didn't interfere with the process. This doesn't mean you never speak. It means your words arise from deep listening, not from your own discomfort. You learn to ask before offering, to wait for the invitation, and even then, you speak slowly, briefly, with care, because you understand that words can either open or close a moment. Often, the impulse to fix is tied to your identity. You want to be seen as someone who helps, someone who knows. But silent wisdom asks you to step out of that role, to let go of the need to be needed, to become invisible, not in absence, but in humility. This humility softens your presence. You no longer enter a conversation with the energy of fixing. You enter with the energy of witnessing. You let go of being right or insightful or powerful. You simply show up fully, without the need to shape the outcome. That presence becomes a kind of sanctuary. People can rest there. They can be raw and confused and emotional without being steered. They can be themselves because you're not trying to turn them into something else. This is especially important when someone is carrying deep grief or trauma. No words will erase what they're feeling, and trying to offer solutions too soon can feel like a dismissal. But when you stay with them, silent, open, grounded, warm, you communicate what words never could, that they are not alone, and they don't need to be fixed to be worthy of love. Even in everyday interactions, this silent wisdom is valuable. You stop giving advice no one asked for. You stop reacting to every complaint with a strategy. You stop thinking that every emotional expression is a call for correction. Instead, you listen, not to respond, but to understand. And the more you do this, the more you begin to notice the subtle forms of control you used to rely on. The way you filled space to avoid tension, the way you talked over silence to avoid intimacy, the way you offered solutions to avoid vulnerability. All of that begins to dissolve. You learn that your presence, unforced and unfiltered, is enough. And in learning that, you become more peaceful not only with others, but with yourself. Because when you stop trying to fix everyone else, you stop trying to fix yourself in the same way. You stop pushing your own pain away. You stop rushing your own process. You learn to meet your inner world with the same silent attention you offer others. You begin to trust your unfolding, your own periods of not knowing, your own messy transitions. And that trust becomes your ground. It becomes the foundation of a life that's not built on controlling experience, but on meeting it fully. This is the heart of silent wisdom, the power of not fixing, the strength of allowing, the clarity that comes from stepping back so life can step forward, in others, in you, in every sacred silent space in between. When you stop trying to fix others, when you let go of the pressure to know what to say, what to do, or how to help, something rare begins to happen. You start to meet people and life without needing to define them. That same space you give to others starts opening inside you. The mind begins to relax its grip. The tension that came from needing to be certain, to be right, or to be useful starts to melt. What's left is something soft, spacious, and free, not because you figured it all out, but because you finally stopped trying to. This softening is the essence of what Zen calls don't know mind. It's not confusion, it's not passivity, it's a return to openness. A way of being that releases the demand for answers and learns to rest in curiosity. In everyday life, the mind constantly builds structures to make sense of things. It wants a narrative, a direction, a solution. And when life doesn't fit neatly into those structures, resistance appears, frustration, blame, anxiety. But don't know mind asks a different question. What if you don't need to know? What if peace comes not from clarity, but from letting go of the need for clarity? This teaching doesn't mean you abandon reason or responsibility. It means you stop grasping for certainty where there is none. You start to see that most of what causes mental tension is not what's happening, it's the insistence on interpreting it, judging it, or predicting it. The mind says, "This is bad, this shouldn't be happening, I must find an answer." And each of those thoughts tightens the body, narrows perception, blocks presence. When you shift into don't know mind, you still feel those responses, but you don't obey them. You acknowledge that a situation is unclear. You admit that your opinions are incomplete. You hold your conclusions loosely. This looseness is not indecision, it's wisdom. It's knowing that clinging to fixed ideas often causes more harm than the uncertainty itself. In Zen practice, students are often reminded to return to the beginner's mind, the mind that meets each moment without overlaying it with past knowledge, the mind that listens as if for the first time, that sees without assumption, that asks, "What is this?" without rushing to answer. This attitude changes everything. It doesn't remove your intelligence, it removes the filter. The world becomes brighter, people become more real, life becomes less of a puzzle to be solved and more of a mystery to be lived. Mental rigidity comes from needing things to be a certain way. You want plans to work out, people to behave, emotions to stay stable. When they don't, resistance sets in. But in Don't Know Mind, you meet these changes with flexibility. You stay connected to reality as it is, not as you hoped it would be. That connection is not always comfortable, but it's peaceful because it's honest. You also begin to see how often your suffering comes from believing your thoughts. You think something will go wrong, and the body reacts as if it already has. You think someone is judging you, and the tension follows. But Don't Know Mind interrupts that pattern. It says, maybe, maybe not. You stop building a whole story on top of a single assumption. You give space for what's real to reveal itself. This space dissolves conflict. Most arguments are two rigid minds crashing into each other, each sure of their version of truth. But when you enter a disagreement with Don't Know Mind, you listen more. You speak with less attachment. You allow for the possibility that both of you are only seeing part of the picture. That humility opens the door to understanding. It softens defensiveness. It makes space for real dialogue. Even your inner dialogue changes. The part of you that criticizes, judges, and narrates begins to lose its authority. You don't fight those thoughts, you just stop bowing to them. You hear them and say, maybe. And in that simple word, the grip loosens. You start trusting experience more than interpretation, the directness of breath, the simplicity of movement, the honesty of silence. This practice also allows creativity to flourish, because when you stop needing to know how something should go, you open to what could happen. You take risks, you explore, you play. You're not afraid of failure because you're not trying to get it right. You're engaging with life, not performing for it. Don't Know Mind also transforms how you hold the future. The mind loves to predict, plan, and prepare. And while some planning is useful, much of it is driven by fear. The fear that without control you'll fall apart. But what if the opposite is true? What if peace arises precisely when you stop holding on so tightly? When you accept that the future is unknowable, you stop living in fear of it. You meet each day not with a script, but with presence. And from that presence, clarity often comes not through force, but through openness. Even in moments of crisis, this mindset helps. You may not know what to do, but you can stay with the moment. Breathe, feel, act from care instead of panic. The mind may scream for certainty, but your body can stay grounded. Your awareness can remain spacious. This spaciousness is not neutral. It's alive. It allows wisdom to arise. Because the wisest actions rarely come from rigid certainty. They come from stillness, from listening, from the willingness to wait until the next step becomes clear, rather than forcing one. Practicing Don't Know Mind doesn't mean you give up learning. It means you stay humble as you learn. You stop pretending that insight makes you better than others. You stop turning knowledge into armor. Instead, you let every experience be fresh. You stay curious. You let go of needing to be seen as someone who has it all figured out. This is especially important when facing internal challenges. The urge to define yourself, to know exactly who you are, can become another form of resistance. You cling to identities. You label your moods, your habits, your history. But those labels are never the whole story. They can become prisons. Don't Know Mind invites you to see yourself freshly in each moment, to drop the story, to feel what's actually here, without naming it, fixing it, or controlling it. Over time, this way of seeing builds trust, not in fixed beliefs, but in awareness itself. You start to trust that you don't need to know to be at peace. That presence is always available, even in uncertainty. That not knowing is not the absence of truth, but the space where truth can emerge. This is a powerful antidote to fear, because fear often disguises itself as the need to know. You think if you can figure it out, you'll feel safe. But the deeper safety comes from letting go, from staying open, from not needing the moment to resolve before you can rest in it. You may notice that when you're deeply present, the question of knowing fades. You're not analyzing, you're experiencing. You're not trying to name the moment, you're in it. And in that immediacy, peace arises naturally, not because everything makes sense, but because you've stopped demanding that it should. This doesn't mean you never take action. It means your action is grounded in reality, not in imagined conclusions. You do what's needed without needing to know what happens next. You respond to life as it unfolds, without resisting the parts that don't fit your plan. Eventually, you begin to see that Don't Know Mind is not something you switch on and off. It becomes a way of being, a constant returning to openness, a reminder that peace lives not in certainty, but in presence, not in control, but in connection. And in that connection, you find something even deeper than peace. You find freedom, the freedom to meet life without armor, the freedom to feel without fear, the freedom to live without always knowing what comes next and not needing to. Letting go of the need to know brings you closer to life as it is, not as you expect it to be. You stop grasping for control. You begin to rest in the openness that allows growth without resistance. But even in that openness, life brings challenges. Even when the mind is still, the world keeps moving. You lose something. Someone misunderstands you. The plan falls apart. A part of you begins to tighten again. This is where the path asks more of you, not more effort, but more depth. Because the question now is not whether discomfort will arise, but what you will do with it. This is where the teaching of Dharma gates begins. In Buddhist practice, a Dharma gate is not a place. It is a moment, a challenge, a difficulty, a friction point that becomes a doorway, not to escape, but to enter, not to run from, but to meet. Every obstacle, every fear, every failure, every loss has the potential to become a path, not because suffering is holy, but because it reveals what you usually avoid. And in what you avoid lies the root of transformation. This is not easy. It asks for honesty. You stop pretending that growth will feel good all the time. You begin to accept that the things which disturb you are not distractions from your path, they are your path. The irritation, the jealousy, the sadness, the fear, each one contains a message. Each one invites you to look more closely, to soften more deeply, to let go more fully. The habit is to resist, to see difficulty as a mistake, a problem to fix, or a sign that you're off course. But obstacles are not detours, they are invitations. And when you turn toward them, instead of away, they change, not necessarily in form, but in function. They stop being blocks and start becoming teachers. To reframe an obstacle as a Dharma gate is to shift your posture toward it. You ask, what is this showing me about myself? What attachment is being touched? What belief is being exposed? What part of me is afraid to stay present right here? The moment you ask those questions, the obstacle begins to open. You start to see that it's not the situation that's causing pain, it's the way your mind is relating to it. The fear of being seen, the need to be right, the story of not being enough. These are the places where suffering roots itself. And every obstacle is a mirror showing you what remains unexamined. This does not mean staying in harmful situations. It means looking at your reaction to discomfort before blaming the outside. Sometimes the gate is in walking away. Sometimes it's in staying. What matters is how you meet the energy that rises within you. That meeting is the gate. Even physical pain can be a gate, not to romanticize suffering, but to understand that pain strips away illusion. It brings you directly into the body, into what is raw, real, and now. When you don't resist it, when you soften into the sensation rather than the story, something shifts. You become more intimate with your own experience. You stop needing to escape. Emotional pain is no different. When grief arises, or anger, or shame, the habitual mind wants to cover it, suppress it, or turn it outward. But if you stay, if you breathe, if you name it without fueling it, you begin to see that the pain isn't asking to be solved, it's asking to be seen. That seeing is the gateway. This also changes how you relate to failure. Instead of turning away in shame, you start to turn toward it with interest. What expectation was I holding? What identity was I trying to protect? What story of success was I serving? You begin to learn not from outcomes, but from your inner patterns. The obstacle becomes instruction. You also begin to notice that some gates repeat. You face the same pattern again and again, in different forms. It's not life punishing you, it's life offering you another chance to wake up, to meet the moment with more presence, to choose differently, not because you should, but because you can. Over time, you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this waking up in me?" The same situation becomes completely different when you bring that question to it. Resistance fades, curiosity rises, and that curiosity opens the gate. You begin to see that there is nothing inherently negative about difficulty. It's not pleasant, but it's not failure. It's simply intensity, and intensity reveals. It shows what's hidden. It brings forward what's unprocessed. It asks you to sit in the fire, not to be burned, but to be refined. In this way, your whole life becomes your practice. You don't need a separate time to meditate. Every tension, every frustration, every delay becomes a bell, calling you back, asking you to pause, to feel, to listen, to open. This doesn't mean becoming passive. It means becoming engaged in a deeper way. You stop reacting and start relating. You learn to hold discomfort without collapsing. You find stillness not because life is quiet, but because you are present. Even relationships become Dharma gates, especially the hard ones. The people who trigger you, who mirror your blind spots, who challenge your self-image, they are not obstacles to your peace. They are invitations to grow your peace from within, not by fixing them, but by meeting what their presence stirs in you. This doesn't make pain go away, but it makes it meaningful. It stops being random. It becomes purposeful, not as punishment, but as revelation. Every gate reveals where your freedom is still blocked. And every time you step through, you reclaim that freedom. Reframing difficulty this way doesn't take the struggle away, but it transforms it. It gives you agency, not over the world, but over your inner posture. You can't always choose what happens, but you can choose how you hold it, whether you see it as something to survive or something to learn from. And when you see it as learning, you stop being afraid of challenge. You start to trust your capacity to meet life. Not because you're perfect, but because you're willing to stay open, willing to be uncomfortable, willing to grow. This willingness becomes your strength, not force, not control, but openness. You become someone who can move through life without needing it to be easy, because you know that even in hardship, something sacred is possible, a deepening, a clarity, a return to what matters. Eventually, you stop separating the sacred from the ordinary, the lesson from the moment. You stop waiting for a quiet, controlled environment to practice. You realize that the gate is here, now, in this very experience, whatever it is. And once you begin living this way, every day becomes a field of practice. Every emotion becomes a teaching. Every challenge becomes a step, not toward perfection, but toward presence. And in that presence, you find a path that was always open, just waiting for you to stop pushing and step through. Once you begin seeing obstacles as Dharma gates, you no longer view pain as a detour. You see it as an entry point. You meet discomfort with presence. You let experience shape growth instead of resisting it. But even as this awareness deepens, there is a subtler layer at work, one that weaves itself into the background of every day. It doesn't arrive with drama. It doesn't always come with strong emotion. It appears in the ordinary, in the unnoticed, in the choices you don't question. And it is here that the most persistent suffering hides. This is where samsara lives, not only in moments of crisis, but in the mundane. Samsara is not just a distant concept of rebirth across lifetimes. It is also the daily cycle of craving, avoidance, and confusion that loops endlessly unless it is seen. It's the pattern of reaching for what promises comfort, rejecting what feels unpleasant, and losing yourself in distraction. It's subtle, it repeats, and until you see it, it runs your life without your permission. You wake up and reach for your phone not out of intention, but out of habit. You scroll not because you're present, but because you're avoiding stillness. You say yes to something you don't want, because you're afraid of disapproval. You chase productivity, not because it fulfills you, but because you believe rest makes you unworthy. These actions seem small, but they are the loops of samsara repeating themselves again and again. Samsara is not always loud suffering. Often, it's the dull unease underneath everything. The way you can't quite relax, even when nothing is wrong. The pressure to become, to prove, to possess. The constant sense that something is missing, and the belief that the next experience will fill the gap. When you look closely, these patterns stem from three roots: attachment, aversion, and ignorance. Attachment is the grasping the belief that happiness lies in securing something external. Aversion is the resistance, the belief that peace comes only by avoiding discomfort. Ignorance is the confusion, the belief that your reactive thoughts are reality. These roots aren't abstract. They show up in the smallest moments. You check your email compulsively, driven by the hope of good news or the fear of bad news. You argue not to understand, but to protect your pride. You say nothing when you mean yes or no, because you don't want to disturb harmony. You delay rest, delay honesty, delay being fully here, because a part of you still believes something else will complete you. This is samsara in its everyday form, a cycle of becoming, striving, fleeing, not because you choose it, but because it operates underneath your awareness. But awareness is the one thing that breaks the cycle. The moment you notice the pattern, the moment you bring presence to the urge instead of obeying it, the loop begins to dissolve. Awareness doesn't stop the urge from arising, but it interrupts your identification with it. You see the craving without needing to feed it. You feel the discomfort without needing to push it away. You witness the fog of confusion without needing to grasp a quick answer. That witnessing is not passive, it is the seed of liberation. This practice begins by turning attention toward the ordinary, not the dramatic, but the familiar. How do you move through your morning? What's your relationship with routine? What happens when someone doesn't respond to your message? Where does your mind go when you're alone, when you're praised, when you're ignored? These are the places where samsara hides. These are the loops that continue because no one is looking. And when you begin to look, gently, without judgment, you see that most of these actions are not inherently wrong. They're just unconscious. They are ways the mind tries to manage discomfort without resolving it. They are movements that create more motion but no rest. This is where mindfulness becomes more than a technique. It becomes a way of seeing, noticing your speech, your choices, your reactions, noticing the tone of voice you use when you want something, noticing the tension in your body when someone says no, noticing the way you distract yourself with activity when silence feels heavy. Each moment of noticing is a break in the cycle, a breath that is no longer controlled by craving or fear, a pause that allows space, and in that space you remember you don't have to follow every impulse. You don't have to complete every loop. You don't have to obey every mental command. Slowly, presence becomes stronger than pattern. You stop reaching for things that used to comfort you, not because they're bad, but because they no longer fool you. You stop needing to fix discomfort right away because you learn to sit with it. You stop believing every story your mind tells because you begin to see how often those stories are built on fear. Even pleasure changes. You stop clinging to it. You let it arise and pass without trying to hold it still. You learn to enjoy without grasping, to receive without demanding, to love without possessing. This is not detachment in the cold sense. It's freedom, a joy that doesn't depend on holding tight. The same is true for discomfort. You stop fleeing from it. You feel it as energy, not identity. You watch it rise, peak, and fade. And in that watching, you become larger than the pain. Not because you suppress it, but because you meet it without adding resistance. This is how samsara loosens its grip, not by making you special, but by making you present. You stop reacting, and you start relating to everything. Even to your own fear, even to your own longing. This shift requires honesty. You begin to ask different questions, not, how can I get what I want? But, what is driving this action? Not, how can I avoid this feeling? But, what am I unwilling to feel? These questions open the mind. They stop the automatic reflexes. They allow you to respond rather than repeat. And with time, you notice space between stimulus and response. You hear the old voice in your mind, but you don't obey it. You feel the tug of urgency, but you pause. You remember that now is not a means to an end, it is the end itself. Each moment becomes an opportunity to choose presence over pattern, not once, but again and again. You wake up, you forget, you wake up again. This is the path. It is not linear, it is not clean, but it is real. And the more you walk it, the less trapped you feel. You begin to trust that nothing you feel needs to define you, that no thought needs to rule you, that even the deepest habits can shift not through force, but through awareness. This is not about becoming perfect, it's about becoming free. Free from the loops that make life feel smaller than it is, free from the habits that repeat suffering instead of resolving it, free from the trance of daily unconsciousness. Samsara is not somewhere else, and neither is freedom. Both are happening here, in the choices you make with your attention, in the moments you meet without grasping, in the patterns you see and no longer feed. And in those ordinary moments, freedom begins not with a breakthrough, but with a breath, with the decision to be here, fully, gently, awake. As you begin to recognize samsara in daily habits and loosen the grip of attachment, aversion, and unconscious repetition, you create space to choose presence over reaction. You start noticing the gaps between what is and what the mind wishes it would be. Yet even as you grow more present and aware, another kind of tension begins to surface, one that has no clear resolution, no tidy ending, and no easy release. It's the discomfort of not knowing, the feeling of unfinished stories, conversations that didn't end well, decisions without closure. emotions that don't settle into something defined. This is where the path turns towards something even quieter, more difficult to hold, and even more liberating. It's here that the practice of allowing the unresolved begins. In Buddhist thought, peace does not always come from answers. It often arises from the willingness to let go of the need for them. The search for closure is deeply human. You want to know why something happened. You want certainty before moving on. You want to label the story and file it away. But many aspects of life offer no such clarity. There are relationships that drift apart with no explanation, emotions that arise without cause, life events that never make logical sense, and the more you demand resolution, the more unease grows. The habit of seeking closure is really the desire to escape uncertainty. You want something solid to stand on. You want the discomfort of ambiguity to end. You want to organize the mess into a meaning you can live with. But this grasping for finality becomes another form of suffering. It keeps you waiting for peace instead of allowing peace to arise within the unknown. Letting go of closure doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you learn to care differently. You hold the open-ended experience without forcing it to resolve. You learn to sit with the knot without untying it. You stop trying to finish what was never yours to complete. This is not indifference. It's maturity. The maturity to stay present even when the mind doesn't get what it wants. The maturity to stop insisting on clear answers where none exist. The maturity to feel fully without needing a conclusion. Much of the discomfort around the unresolved comes from the mind's craving for control. When something is left open, the mind spins. It fills the silence with stories. It revisits the event over and over, trying to rewrite the ending. It imagines alternative outcomes, but these mental loops only deepen the sense of separation from the present moment. Awareness offers a different path. Instead of feeding the story, you learn to meet the feeling underneath it. Maybe it's grief, confusion, longing, or regret. You let yourself feel that energy without demanding that it resolves. You stay with the rawness of the experience. And slowly, the grip loosens not because the situation changed, but because your relationship to it did. Some things are unresolved because they are incomplete. Others are unresolved because they are complete in ways the mind won't accept. There is no way to tell the difference from thought alone. But presence helps you recognize what no amount of thinking ever could, that the experience itself was enough. It does not need to end in a story that makes sense. The need for closure is also tied to identity. When something ends unexpectedly or without explanation, the self-image feels threatened. You wonder what it says about you. You question your choices. You replay what you could have done differently. This keeps you trapped in a loop, trying to protect a version of yourself that cannot be protected. Letting go of closure means you let go of the need to make it about you. You allow the mystery. You allow that some people leave without answers, that some emotions rise without meaning, that some phases of life dissolve without a final word, and rather than resisting, you learn to breathe within the unknown. This is a profound shift. It changes how you relate to the past. Instead of rewriting or resolving it, you begin to honor it as it was, without needing to shape it into something more comfortable. You acknowledge that life is not a narrative with a clean arc. It's a field of unfolding moments, some complete, others not. Practicing this tolerance for the unresolved can begin in small ways. When an interaction feels unfinished, notice the urge to fix it. Pause. Let the discomfort be there. Feel what arises in your body. Is there a tightness, a sadness, an urgency? Stay with it. Let it pass through. Don't rush to send the text, to ask for explanation, to make it right. Stay with the energy that's already here. Over time, this teaches you that not every moment needs to be closed. Some things are better left open, like a window that lets air move through. The openness itself becomes the healing. It gives space for new insight, new feelings, new layers of growth to emerge. This also applies to emotions. Some emotions don't resolve on schedule, they linger, they return in waves, and the more you try to end them, the more pressure builds. But when you allow yourself to feel without needing the emotion to vanish, the resistance melts. The emotion may still be there, but you're no longer fighting it. This kind of presence builds deep trust. Trust in life's unfolding, trust in your capacity to meet it, trust that you don't need every question answered to move forward, that you don't need full understanding to rest in peace. It also brings gentleness. You stop blaming yourself for not having closure. You stop demanding it from others. You begin to hold the open-ended moments with kindness. You give yourself permission to not know. You stop calling the lack of resolution a failure. Allowing the unresolved teaches patience. You learn that some clarity comes only with time, and some never comes at all. And in either case, you're still whole. You're still here. You're still allowed to keep living, loving, and growing without tying every loose end. There's a kind of freedom that comes from letting go of resolution. You begin to see that the moment is not less valid just because it lacks a conclusion. You allow space for mystery, for complexity, for the sacredness of not knowing. This becomes a new way of being. You meet life as it comes, not as you planned. You stop trying to shape every moment into a conclusion. You stay open, even when things don't make sense. And in that openness, peace begins to arise not from certainty, but from surrender. You learn to hold the silence between words, the pauses between phases, the spaces where nothing is decided. You begin to appreciate the beauty of questions that stay open. And that appreciation becomes a form of healing, a way of making peace with life, exactly as it is unfinished, mysterious, and deeply alive. Allowing the unresolved to exist without forcing answers opens the heart in unexpected ways. It teaches patience, trust, and the deep understanding that peace doesn't come from closure, it comes from presence. But even as this presence deepens, another pattern may quietly emerge. It often wears the mask of care. It speaks in the language of kindness. It seems noble and selfless. Yet beneath it lives a form of resistance, the urge to fix someone else's pain, so you don't have to feel your own discomfort in witnessing it. This is where the subtle art of compassion without rescue begins. To care for someone without needing to rescue them is one of the most difficult and sacred aspects of spiritual maturity. It asks you to show up fully, to remain present with suffering, not just your own, but the suffering of others, without grabbing for control. It challenges the belief that love means solving, that presence requires action, that support is only real when it looks like intervention. Often, what we call helping is an unconscious attempt to relieve our own anxiety. We see someone in pain and feel immediately responsible. We step in with advice, solutions, or emotional labor, not only because we care, but because we are uncomfortable with what we're witnessing. We want to move the pain, redirect it, tidy it. But in doing so, we may unknowingly bypass the very experience that needs to be held. To hold suffering without controlling it is to trust the other person's path. It means believing that their pain, however intense, does not require your fixing to become meaningful. It means recognizing the dignity in struggle and not assuming that your role is to remove it. It is trusting the deeper wisdom within them, even when they cannot yet feel it themselves. This kind of compassion is not distant, it is deeply engaged. But it's engagement without intrusion. It is presence that stays rooted even when there's nothing to offer but quiet understanding. It's the choice to stay, to feel, to witness, without making it about your ability to help. You begin to notice when your impulse to help is coming from fear. Fear of watching someone hurt, fear of saying the wrong thing, fear of being seen as uncaring if you don't step in. These fears, left unchecked, become control. The helping becomes about you, not them. And often, what people in pain most need is not your solutions. They need your stillness, your groundedness, your belief in their capacity to move through it. In Buddhist teachings, true compassion is inseparable from wisdom. Wisdom knows that no one can be saved from their own process. Wisdom sees clearly that suffering is not a flaw to fix, but a human experience to hold. Compassion without wisdom leads to burnout, overfunctioning, and attachment to outcome. Wisdom without compassion becomes cold or withdrawn. The path is in their union. When you begin practicing this balance, it can feel unfamiliar. You may feel helpless or even guilty, but the guilt is often a conditioned response to not performing the role of fixer. Society often rewards action over stillness, advice over listening, direction over presence. But spiritual care asks for something deeper than performance. It asks for your being. You sit with someone in pain and say nothing, not because you don't care, but because you care enough not to interrupt what is unfolding. You let their tears come without rushing to wipe them away. You let silence stretch without filling it. You let them be exactly as they are, without pushing for change. This is not passivity. It is a kind of fierce love, the love that believes in their wholeness even in their breaking. This practice also transforms your relationship to boundaries. You no longer offer yourself beyond your capacity. You no longer confuse self-sacrifice with service. You recognize when helping has turned into control, and you step back not to abandon, but to return to clarity. You may notice how certain relationships rely on your over-functioning. Perhaps you've always been the one who fixes, explains, absorbs. But once you begin to pull back from rescuing, dynamics shift. Some may resist, some may accuse, some may withdraw. This too is part of the process. You are no longer participating in the cycle that keeps them disempowered. You are no longer rescuing them from their own capacity to grow. Compassion without rescue honors sovereignty. It sees the person in front of you not as someone to be saved, but as someone to be seen. It respects their timing, their decisions, even their mistakes. It stands beside them, not above them. And it offers warmth without agenda. In this way, your energy stays clean. You are not drained by their suffering because you are not carrying what isn't yours. You are not overwhelmed because you are not managing their emotional world. You are present, receptive, clear. This presence also has a profound effect on the one being held. When someone feels seen without being fixed, they begin to trust themselves. They begin to listen inward instead of seeking outward. They begin to touch their own clarity, not because it was given to them, but because it was reflected back. You stop being the source of their healing and become a mirror for it, a space where they can hear themselves, where they can feel their pain without being rushed through it. This kind of holding is rare and deeply transformative. It requires that you become comfortable with not knowing what to do, with not having the perfect words, with not getting thanked or acknowledged. Your presence becomes the offering knot, your insight, not your solutions, not your ability to soothe, just your willingness to stay. And this willingness must be grounded in your own practice, because to hold suffering without control, you must know how to hold your own pain. You must have met your own fear, your own sadness, your own helplessness without turning away. That inner work becomes the ground from which real compassion grows. Over time, this practice reshapes your understanding of service. You stop seeing yourself as the answer. You become a presence that allows others to find their own. You become someone who trusts the intelligence of pain, the necessity of discomfort, the timing of healing. You begin to feel peace even in the presence of suffering, not because it stops hurting, but because you're no longer resisting it. You are no longer trying to force change before readiness. You are no longer inserting yourself where only stillness belongs. This is not detachment, it is devotion without possession, love without strategy, support without control. It is what remains when you have nothing left to offer but yourself, and you offer that presence fully. And in that offering, something beautiful happens. You realize that just being there, without fixing, without fleeing, without controlling, is more powerful than anything you could have said or done. It is the space where healing begins, not because you made it happen, but because you allowed it to. When you stop rescuing others and begin holding their pain without controlling it, something profound begins to shift, not only in how you relate to them, but in how you relate to your own inner world. You start to notice how often your thoughts, emotions, and sensations rise like waves demanding action. The same impulse that once rushed in to fix someone else now shows itself in how you try to manage, fix, or avoid your own discomfort. The mind becomes narrow, reactive, confined. But there is another way to meet what arises without shrinking or tightening, a way that is not about controlling what passes through your awareness, but expanding the space that holds it. This is the practice of cultivating a mind like the sky. In Tibetan teachings, this metaphor points to a spacious quality of awareness zone that does not resist, judge, or cling to anything that appears. Thoughts come and go like clouds. Emotions rise and fall like storms. Sensations appear and dissolve like bursts of wind. But the sky itself remains untouched, open, vast. The sky doesn't argue with the weather. It doesn't demand clarity. It doesn't identify with what passes through it. It simply allows. When you practice this kind of awareness, you stop trying to fix every thought. You stop chasing every emotion for meaning. You stop pushing away what's uncomfortable. Instead, you shift your focus from the content of experience to the space around it. That shift is where freedom begins. Most people live with a mind that feels small, defined by thoughts, boxed in by emotion. You identify with the story your mind is telling and contract around it. If the thought says, "You're not good enough," the body tightens. If a difficult feeling arises, you assume it means something is wrong. The mind resists, and in that resistance, suffering deepens. But when you begin to rest in the sky-like quality of mind, the experience changes. You don't try to stop the thought. You don't try to replace it. You don't try to silence it. You simply notice it arise in a space that is much larger than the thought itself. You watch it like a cloud floating through vastness. And just like a cloud, it changes shape. It passes. It loses its grip. The same goes for emotions. Fear may rise, and instead of collapsing into it or trying to analyze it, you notice it. You feel the sensations in the body. You breathe with it. You hold it in open awareness, without shrinking. And slowly, fear becomes energy rather than identity. It doesn't define you, it passes through you. This kind of spaciousness doesn't mean detachment or distance. It means inclusion without entanglement. You include what arises without letting it pull you out of the sky. You don't become the cloud. You remain the space that sees it. This requires training. The default tendency of the mind is to contract around strong experience. It rushes into reaction. It grabs for distraction or explanation. But every time you pause, every time you choose to observe instead of react, you strengthen the capacity to stay open. You build trust in your own awareness. You begin to believe that you can hold whatever arises without falling apart. One way to practice this is through labeling. When a thought arises, simply note it, thinking. When an emotion arises, name it gently. Sadness, anger, joy. You're not analyzing, you're witnessing. You're creating space between awareness and the object of awareness. That space is the sky. Another method is to focus on the breath, not to control it, but to feel it as an anchor within the body. The breath becomes a doorway into presence. And as you stay with it, you begin to notice the mind's habits without following them. You remain still even as thoughts move through. This stability allows you to respond rather than react. It gives you room to choose. The thought of blame may arise, but you don't speak from it. The impulse to shut down may surface, but you don't collapse into it. The discomfort may grow, but you don't flee. You hold steady. You let the weather pass. Spacious awareness also helps you see through illusion. Many thoughts and emotions feel urgent when they appear. They demand attention, interpretation, reaction. But from the sky of awareness, you begin to see how quickly they change, how unreliable they are as guides to truth. What felt like certainty becomes doubt. What felt overwhelming becomes soft. Not because you fixed it, but because you let it move. The sky does not need to manage the clouds. It does not resist the storm. It does not cling to the sun. It receives everything equally, without preference. When you begin to live from this space, you become less caught in comparison, less pulled by craving, less paralyzed by fear. You begin to live with ease, not because life is easier, but because you are no longer resisting every shift. This does not make you passive, it makes you clear. You still take action. You still speak, choose, create. But your action comes from space, not reactivity. It comes from clarity, not compulsion. You move with the flow of things rather than against them. Over time, you begin to experience yourself differently. You are not your thoughts. You are not your pain. You are not your confusion. You are the space that sees, the awareness that includes, the openness that holds. Even joy becomes more sustainable, not because it lasts longer, but because you're not clinging to it. You enjoy it as it passes through, like sunlight moving across the sky. You know it will change, and that knowing lets you savor it more deeply. Spaciousness also reveals what lies beneath thought. When the chatter quiets, even for a moment, there is something still, clear, and kind beneath it. Not a voice, not a concept, but a felt sense of being. That sense is not touched by storms. It doesn't need protection. It doesn't need validation. It simply is. This is the heart of sky-like mind, not a technique, but a way of being, a willingness to stop contracting, a willingness to rest in what is, a recognition that resistance is optional and that peace does not require control, it requires openness. The more you return to this awareness, the less you fear experience. You stop bracing against discomfort. You stop grasping at certainty. You stop narrowing your life into only what feels manageable. You let it all come, and in that letting, you become more free. Freedom doesn't come from perfecting the mind. It comes from realizing that you are not the mind's contents. You are the space that allows them, the sky that welcomes clouds and still remains vast, still remains open, still remains untouched. This is not something you need to achieve, it's something you remember, over and over, in each breath, in each moment, in each choice to witness, instead of resist. The more you return to it, the more it returns to you, until eventually you stop looking for peace and simply recognize that peace is the space in which everything already moves. As the mind begins to expand like the sky, holding thoughts and emotions without shrinking around them, something else quietly becomes visible. A deeper attachment, subtler than grasping at thoughts or resisting feelings. It's the attachment to the one who is experiencing them, the sense of self who reacts, who owns, who narrates. The identity that says this is happening to me, or this says something about who I am. Even when thoughts are let go and emotions are allowed to pass, this core belief often remains untouched. The belief in a fixed self, a solid me. But this too can be released. In Buddhist teachings, this insight is known as anatta, the truth of non-self. It is not the denial of your existence, but the realization that what you call the self is not as fixed or independent as it seems. That the I you protect, perform, and defend is not a single unchanging thing, it is a process. A collection of habits, thoughts, feelings, and memories that arise and pass just like everything else. You begin to notice how often this self is the center of tension. Someone criticizes you, and a part of you flares up not only because of the words, but because your self-image feels attacked. A plan fails, and the narrative of "I am not good enough" takes over. You succeed, and the mind rushes to strengthen the identity of being valuable. The self keeps rearranging itself to maintain a consistent story, but the story is never complete, and it always needs protecting. Letting go of this identity doesn't mean becoming empty or disconnected. It means loosening the need to constantly define yourself. It means no longer filtering every experience through the lens of who you think you are or who you think you should be. It means resting in what is here without layering it with interpretation. You start to see that many reactions are not responses to reality, but to the story the self is telling. The embarrassment isn't in the moment, it's in how the mind says, "Others now see you." The fear isn't in the situation, it's in the imagined threat to your identity. The craving isn't for the object, it's for the validation it promises. Once you begin to recognize these patterns, you stop taking them so personally. You see that your thoughts about yourself are just more thoughts, that your roles are temporary, that your preferences, habits, opinions, and even memories shift over time. There is no single thing you can point to and say, "This is me." What you are is unfolding, fluid, dependent on countless conditions. This realization can be unsettling at first. The self gives a feeling of stability, of knowing where you end and the world begins, but it also creates pressure. You always have to defend it, explain it, hold it together. Letting go is not a loss, it's a release, the relief of not needing to perform. With practice, this loosening creates a kind of spaciousness. You stop needing to win arguments to preserve your identity. You stop needing to be seen in a certain way. You stop reacting to feedback as if it were a personal threat. You start living more lightly, not because you don't care, but because you no longer live inside a story that constantly needs confirmation. This doesn't mean you lose your individuality. It means you no longer mistake the story for the whole truth. You may still feel, choose, speak, create, but with less tension, less defense, more fluidity. You become like water, responsive, not reactive, present, not defined. In daily life, this looks like noticing when the self contracts, when it says, "I can't let them think that about me," or "I have to prove myself," or "this always happens to me." Each of these thoughts is a chance to pause, to recognize that they're based on identity, not reality. And in that pause, there is space. Space to let the thought pass, to stay with the breath, to respond from awareness, not identity. Relationships change as well. When you're no longer building a self through comparison or validation, you stop needing others to confirm your worth. You listen more, you argue less. You let people be as they are, without needing their behavior to reflect something about you. This is not detachment, it's connection without ego, care without control. Even your relationship with the past softens. You stop needing to keep the story coherent. You stop clinging to what you've been or fearing what that means for who you are. You realize that growth isn't about changing the self, it's about seeing through it, letting it dissolve where it no longer serves. This insight is not a belief to adopt, it is something to experience directly, and it's felt most clearly in moments of quiet, when the mind slows, when identity isn't being reinforced, when you are simply present, aware, without commentary. In that silence, there is no solid self, just breath, sensation, stillness. Returning to this space again and again, the need to be someone loosens. You don't disappear. You don't dissolve into nothing. You simply stop holding so tightly. And what's left is something truer than any story, a presence that doesn't need to be named. From this place, life becomes more fluid. You meet change without resistance because there's no fixed self to defend. You feel emotions without making them personal. You act without needing to perform. You experience each moment as new, not filtered through identity, but fresh and full. This kind of freedom isn't about transcending humanity. It's about becoming more human, more real, more open, more connected. The walls drop, the masks fall away. You become simple again. Just awareness meeting experience, just presence flowing through the day. And in this simplicity, suffering decreases. Not because pain vanishes, but because the one who resists it softens. The one who takes it personally fades. The experience remains, but the suffering does not. You feel more, but you struggle less. This is the quiet gift of anatta. The relief of not being trapped in a fixed self. The joy of not needing to be anything but here. The freedom of letting life unfold without writing your name across every page. You stop being the center of every scene, and in that shift, life becomes wide again, full, gentle, alive. As the sense of a fixed self begins to loosen, the struggle to constantly defend, define, and preserve your identity starts to dissolve. You no longer react from the fear of losing control over who you think you are. Instead, there's more space to meet life with openness. But even as identity softens, there's another challenge that often arises. Without the need to cling to a solid me, the question becomes, how do you act? How do you engage with life? If you no longer operate from a fixed narrative, how do you find the balance between doing and letting go, between showing up and surrendering? This is where the middle way becomes essential. The middle way is one of the most foundational teachings in Buddhism, but it's often misunderstood as neutrality or compromise. In truth, it's far more alive than that. It is a dynamic, moment-to-moment discernment, a living balance between extremes. It is the art of knowing when to act and when to let go, when to apply effort and when to release control, when to speak and when to stay silent. It is not status, it flows with the conditions of the moment, always rooted in awareness. The two extremes it avoids are control and passivity. Control tries to dominate life. It operates from fear, clinging, and resistance. It wants things to unfold a certain way and resists any deviation. It tries to force outcomes, manage others' emotions, and avoid uncertainty. On the other side, passivity pulls away from responsibility. It pretends that surrender means checking out. It masks disengagement as peace. It withholds effort not from wisdom, but from avoidance. Both extremes create suffering. Control exhausts you. It tightens the body, narrows the mind, and burns out the heart. You begin to believe that if you stop holding everything together, it will all fall apart. But in this grasping, you lose connection with the present. You become trapped in managing what cannot be managed. Every moment feels like a problem to solve, not an experience to meet. Passivity, on the other hand, numbs you. It hides behind phrases like, "it doesn't matter," or "whatever happens, happens," when in fact there is still fear underneath. Fear of failure, fear of responsibility, fear of showing up fully. So you withdraw. But passivity isn't peace, it's retreat. It may look calm, but it leaves you disconnected from your own potential to respond with care and purpose. The middle way offers something entirely different. It teaches that wisdom does not live in extremes. It lives in the subtle, changing edge between effort and ease. It lives in presence that listens, then moves accordingly. It is engagement without grasping, surrender without collapse. This kind of balance can only come through direct experience. It's not a belief, it's something you feel in your body. When you're trying too hard, the breath shortens, the muscles tighten. When you're checked out, your energy sinks, your awareness blurs. But when you are aligned with the middle way, there is clarity and responsiveness. There's alertness without anxiety, intention without strain. You start to notice this in small ways. When speaking, are you forcing your point or avoiding it altogether? When making decisions, are you overanalyzing or giving up? When emotions arise, Are you clamping down or drifting into indifference? These are the places to return to the middle, not by trying to hit a perfect balance, but by softening into presence and letting the next step emerge from there. The middle way also teaches you to work with your habits gently. Instead of trying to control your tendencies or suppress them, you bring awareness to them. You watch their pattern, you feel their momentum, and from that awareness you begin to shift. Not by fighting yourself, but by inviting a different way. This path honors both discipline and rest, both strength and tenderness. It knows there is a time to stand firm and a time to yield. It teaches that letting go is not the same as giving up, and that showing up is not the same as control. In daily life, this means approaching each task with full presence, but without clinging to results. You clean the house not to achieve perfection, but to care for your space. You have a difficult conversation not to fix someone, but to connect honestly. You meditate not to reach a goal, but to return to awareness. And when outcomes don't match your hopes, you meet that too, from the middle. You feel the disappointment, but you don't collapse. You notice the urge to blame, but you don't feed it. You stay with what is, gently adjusting, letting go where needed, re-engaging where wise. The middle way is not a rigid middle point between two poles. It's not 50% action and 50% surrender. It is about seeing clearly what is needed now, in this moment, with these conditions. Sometimes that means fierce action, sometimes it means deep rest. What matters is that it comes from awareness, not fear or habit. This path also helps you relate differently to challenges. When something difficult arises, control tries to fix it immediately, and passivity tries to avoid it. But the middle way meets it with curiosity. It asks, what's needed here? What can be done with care? What can be released? There is space for feeling, space for pausing, space for thoughtful movement. In your relationships, this means holding boundaries without harshness and offering love without losing yourself. It means listening without needing to fix and speaking truth without trying to control the outcome. It means not hiding in comfort or pushing through pain without regard for the cost. Even in your inner life, the middle way is vital. You stop criticizing yourself for not being spiritual enough. You stop pushing to get everything right. You also stop abandoning your practice when things get uncomfortable. You stay with yourself not perfectly, but steadily, with compassion, not judgment. This middle ground becomes a refuge. You are no longer pulled from one extreme to the other. You begin to trust the unfolding of your life, not because you've given up control, but because you've stopped needing it. Not because you're passive, but because you've stopped believing that force is the only way to move forward. You live more softly, more clearly, more fully. And this softness is not weakness. It is what allows you to adapt, to flow, to stay rooted when conditions change. It's what lets you hold both joy and sorrow without collapsing. It's what helps you meet each moment without needing it to be anything other than what it is. The middle way is not just a teaching, it's a way of being, a way of living without extremes, a way of staying connected without clinging, of letting go without disappearing. And as you walk it, moment by moment, you begin to discover a new kind of strength. The strength of being here fully, of meeting life exactly as it is, with wisdom, with presence, with heart. Living the middle way dissolves the false idea that you must choose between pushing too hard and withdrawing completely. It shows that peace is not passive and effort is not always control. It teaches you to move with life rather than struggle against it. But as you continue walking that balanced path, one virtue becomes essential, not glamorous, not loud, but quietly powerful. Without it, all inner growth stalls. Without it, awareness collapses when conditions aren't ideal. It is the strength to remain steady when the mind wants to escape. That strength is patience. In many teachings, Patience is mistaken for endurance, something passive, a willingness to wait things out or tolerate discomfort until it goes away. But in Buddhist practice, patience is never resignation. It is an active, foresee, deep, conscious refusal to be pushed around by reactivity. It is not simply the absence of reaction, it is the presence of courage. True patience is heroic because it goes against every instinct that tells you to rush, resist, or control. It requires strength to stay with discomfort without turning it into a problem, to remain in the moment without demanding it be different, to hold space for tension, for difficulty, for others' behavior, and for your own imperfection without collapsing into judgment. You practice patience when you feel the urge to interrupt but choose to listen. When you sense anger, rise and breathe instead of lashing out. When a situation doesn't resolve quickly and you remain open instead of tightening with frustration. Each of these moments is an act of inner discipline, not passivity. Patience also breaks the illusion of immediacy, the belief that you must have relief now, that progress should be fast, that insight should be constant. It unravels the story that if something takes time, it's not working. But growth that endures is slow. Change that matters is subtle. Insight that liberates arises through ripening, not rushing. In this way, patience protects your practice. You may sit in meditation and feel nothing shift for days. You may face the same emotion for weeks without clarity. You may speak with care and receive no response. Without patience, you abandon the path. With patience, you stay not because the result is guaranteed, but because the process is sacred. Patience creates space for awareness to deepen. Without it, you interrupt your own unfolding. The mind says, "This is taking too long," and tries to escape. But with patience, you stop measuring your experience by time. You stop needing constant change. You learn to stay in the experience itself without needing it to entertain or reward you. This becomes especially important when dealing with others. You start to see that much of your frustration in relationships is not about what someone did, it's about your timeline. You wanted them to grow faster, to understand you quicker, to heal on your schedule, but people don't evolve on command. Real compassion waits without pressure. Real presence makes room for timing that's not yours to decide. This doesn't mean letting people walk all over you. Patience is not inaction. It simply means you respond from steadiness, not urgency. You don't push for results that aren't ready. You don't turn discomfort into panic. You remain anchored even when nothing is moving. In your relationship with yourself, patience is equally vital. The mind has been trained for years to react, to grasp, to judge. These habits don't vanish overnight. But each time you meet them with understanding instead of anger, you weaken their grip. Each time you fail and stay kind, you break the pattern of self-harm. This too is patience. Patience is what lets you stay in discomfort without adding resistance. The discomfort may not change quickly, but the suffering caused by resisting it starts to fade. You begin to notice the texture of the feeling. Instead of just trying to get rid of it, you start to relate to pain instead of fighting it. And that shift is profound. Even joy is affected. Without patience, you miss the slow joy of subtle moments, the quiet beauty of being with someone without needing anything, the deep contentment that grows not from intense pleasure, but from quiet presence. These moments take time to feel. Patience makes them visible. Patience also transforms ambition. You stop measuring your path by how far you've come. You start to measure it by how present you are. You don't give up on growth, but you stop making growth into pressure. You stop turning the spiritual path into another competition. You let yourself evolve at the speed of sincerity. You start to notice the moments when the mind screams for change. This shouldn't be happening. This should be over by now. I should be different. These thoughts become signals, not truths. You don't obey them. You don't fight them. You notice them and return to stillness. Over time, patience becomes your ground. You no longer chase peace, you become the condition that allows peace to emerge. You don't force stillness, you become still. And that stillness invites transformation without demand. Patience also builds resilience. Life will not always move at your pace. People will disappoint you. Emotions will overwhelm you. Plans will fall apart. Without patience, you break when things don't go your way. With patience, you bend and remain rooted. You feel everything and stay present. You lose nothing of your humanity, but you lose the need to resist what is. This is why patience is a strength, not a fallback. It doesn't mean letting life happen to you. It means meeting life as it is, without trying to overpower it. It means working with what's here, instead of fighting what isn't. Practicing patience doesn't mean you never act. It means you act without being driven by compulsion. You choose from clarity, not from reaction. You move when it's timino, when discomfort says you must. This is especially important when working through conflict. The mind wants resolution, the body tenses around it. But sometimes resolution takes time or doesn't come. Patience lets you hold the tension without lashing out. It lets you stay with the conversation even when it's slow, messy, unclear. You stop pushing others to meet you, and you start meeting the moment as it is. Even creativity needs patience. Ideas ripen in their own time. Forcing inspiration often blocks it. But when you sit, show up, and wait with openness, something begins to flow. Not because you controlled it, but because you created the conditions for it to appear. In all things, patience becomes your anchor. You move from urgency to presence, from demand to trust, from control to care. And that care extends to everything you touch. You no longer rush people through their process. You no longer force yourself into clarity. You walk at the speed of trust. You let the moment speak before deciding what it means. Patience is a quiet power. It doesn't shout, it doesn't push, but it never gives up. It stays when others leave. It returns when others rush ahead. It remains soft when the world turns hard. And in that staying, something in you begins to grow roots. With those roots, nothing can uproot you. Not confusion, not pain, not time, because you are no longer rushing to get somewhere else. You are fully here, in the middle of the process, and that is enough. This is the strength of patience, not as a fallback, but as a force that holds everything together when it seems like it's falling apart. A force that allows healing, understanding, and growth to happen not on your timeline, but on life's. And that, in the end, is where real freedom begins. You've now walked through a journey. Most people spend a lifetime avoiding the journey of letting go, not as defeat, but as awakening. You've met the wisdom that lives beneath resistance. You've seen how craving, fear, and control keep suffering alive, and how softening into reality as it is opens the door to peace. You've explored how striving blinds us, how expectations entangle us, how identity locks us in place. You've learned that simplicity brings clarity, that emotions can pass like weather, and that not knowing isn't a weakness, it's a portal to freedom. You've discovered how even death, conflict, and the unresolved can become teachers. That compassion doesn't always mean fixing, and that patience isn't waiting, it's strength in stillness. You've learned that life doesn't need to be resisted, controlled, or perfected. It needs to be met breath by breath with presence. That true freedom isn't found in changing everything. It's found in no longer needing to. Now, as you drift into rest, let this truth settle into your body. You don't have to struggle to be whole. You don't have to solve everything before peace arrives. You are already home, in this moment, just as it is. If this touched something in you, share one lesson you're taking with you in the comments. Let's build a space where others can see your reflection and remember their own. And if this content helps you, return to your subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss a chance to wake up gently, one mindful moment at a time. Rest well, friend. The The path is not somewhere else. It's here, and now it walks with you.